Okay, here we are. Spotlight video. I need my other glass. Oh, thank goodness they're in front of me. These glasses, they won't help me. I'd say, let's see what we say. I took Nexters and Friday off especially to make a Lenormand. Oh, nice. That's fantastic, Jasmine. Lenormand weekend. Man, okay, Mandy, let's see. I love the puzzle aspect, but it's taking me a while to click with the cards. I mean, and it's going to, for sure, feeling frustrated, Cassandra. Yeah, I mean, you have to keep pulling yourself back to the fact that if whoever's taken college 6-week classes, you're getting a ton of information that you're going to have to digest. And so your job for the 6 weeks of the actual class is to sort of take it in. You've got the videos to rewatch later. You have the handouts to do later. But the clicking part of things, a lot of that just comes from repetition and from using them and for letting the brain over, especially if you're totally new to this. Now, some people, boy, am I bright. Some people have done some Lenormand as they came into class, so it's a little bit different. Whereas if you just started to do Lenormand, 6 weeks isn't very long in a full system, especially going into making sure you get to know how to do the grand tableau and all that kind of thing. And the clicking part is really just using them. There's just no substitution. Nobody can sort of give you a magic wand, unfortunately, for things just starting to fall and go smooth. That's the other thing you'll hear, people like, it doesn't feel smooth when I'm like making my sentences or reading them. There's just no substitution for time and for getting those cards consistently, like I said last week, talking those things out. But as long as right at where we're at now in class, you have at least a fairly comfortable feel for what the cards mean, that you can sort of look at a ship and get an idea what that is. And though some of that's actually memorization, but you just think about a ship and, okay, it's long journeys. And so as long as those sort of meanings are falling into place for you right now, the clicking and the smoothness and just kind of rolling into readings, that's going to come with not giving up and continuing to put the cards on the table and maybe lowering your expectations of what your readings are going to sound like or in your brain, or if you speak them out loud. Because as long as you're getting some sort of a message back from it, even if parts of it are confusing, but you're like, okay, I kind of see where this is going. I couldn't maybe verbalize it 100% how I got there, but I'm getting something back from it. You're starting that process there of building that sort of relationship up with a complete system, right? If you think of some of you if you've read tarot or something for a while, when you first started reading tarot, the same thing happens. It's a clunkiness. There is, okay, I know what each of these cards mean, but I don't understand how to pull those together, or dang it, I can't ever get court cards, or, there's frustrations in learning any kind of system. And this isn't sort of a faux tarot or a faux something else. It's its own system. And so really learning it and falling into it and getting smooth and comfortable with it is going to take time. Okay, let me see. I'm not seeing your questions because I've got you covered up for a moment whilst I bring down my angelic brightness so that you don't leave class with a headache from the bright whiteness of me shining on you. I think that's a little bit better. Okay. It's a beautiful sunshiny day. I am not going to complain because it has been cold and gloomy. Okay, let me close that, and so that way I can hear let me make sure we're recording. Pause, stop recording, so that means we're recording. Okay, and I'm going to scroll back up. Yes, okay, so I'm feeling frustrated. We talked about that. Hello, Prentice. Happy Lunar New Year to you as well. I had problems reading two diagonals, the ring and the rider. The rest clicked, but it was reading for myself, so I knew that they were telling me, I knew what they were telling me apart from those two. Wendy, did you send me, I'm not caught up on everybody's grand tableau. So if you sent that to me, if not, Wendy, send me a picture or what it was, and I'll take a look at it. Or just remind me that that was a problem if you've already sent it to me, so that I can take a look at the exact reading and try to help you out with that. Share, naturally my job cranked up. Of course. Why do jobs not know that, we have important things to do here? I'm not spending as much time as I like. Yeah, you'll be able to have this to go back to. I'm not planning on shutting the Lenormand group down, because I figure even when the next group of people come in, everybody, I'm planning on just keeping that group in place so that people can come back to that if they want to, as they're continuing to work with it. So yeah, you'll be able to continue as you have more time. Hello, Mr. Chris. Ginger tea. I can't drink ginger. Oh, makes me so sick. And it's supposed to make you feel better. It's supposed to make you not unnauseous. So it's good for being people who are nauseous. But I can't take it. It makes me very nauseous. I don't know why. It's so weird. I had malaria really bad. I had the lethal form when I was 18. And they were like, drink ginger ale, because it's terrible. Anyways, I'm like, no, that made it worse. So now I can do Sprite. Random sidetrack. Oh, to ginger. Okay, so you did send it to me, Wendy. Okay, great. I will take a look at that and definitely get back to you on that. Can we do it this week as well? Yes, yep. Yeah, as long as you're sending one thing in a week, I'll take a peek at it. Again, I know if you sent me in this week, I'm not totally caught up on everybody yet. That's my goal for this weekend. So, but yes, you can send in one a week. Now, I do ask that people, and I wish I should have said at the beginning, if you get to the end of the 6 weeks and then send me 6 things in at one time, you probably aren't going to get a very thorough, I might take a peek at them, but that gets to be problematic if everybody's sending 6 things in. So that's just once a week, send me something, and I try to get back on those. And people are great on the forum too. If you throw something up, and you don't have to have them do the whole reading, but like, I'm really confused about this part, and you can get some feedback at least to give you ideas. I'm a real ginger addict. Ginger ale, I would assume is the same as ginger beer. No, can't do it. Okay, so we did have a few people who did their grand tableaus for the first time, which is exciting. What does it mean when the woman is looking down at a man in the grand tableau? What does it mean when the woman is looking down as a man? I'm not sure. Oh, looking down at a man in the grand tableau. Again, that falls into the problematic and how you choose to read them. And that's one of the things, is there are cards now where instead of traditionally, you're going to have to use directionality well. The traditional way that you're going to see is the man is facing one way and the woman is facing this way. So that if you put them next to each other, they're either facing each other or they're back to back, right? A lot of people making Lenormand decks don't actually read Lenormand, or that's kind of gotten lost in the translation as they've learned how to read. And so you will have women that are it's usually the woman, that demure Victorian position where the head's kind of looking down. You'll see this in the 1889 Lenormand for sure, where she's just kind of looking down. But then usually the man's not looking like that. The man's usually looking straight ahead or from right to left. So you don't actually have 2 significators that are looking at each other so that you can say, okay, well, they're back to back, there's some trouble there, or they're front to front, and so they're looking at each other. It gets to be very confusing. And so there are 2 options here. One option is you take one deck that has those positions, and you only use, or you can buy a deck for collection, but you only use decks that have significators that are face to face, so that you can have face to face or back to back. Or you simply decide that to the right on the man is, you decide what directions things are, and you can literally, let's say you have a deck like the 1889, and I can't remember what direction. I've used this so many times, so you would think that I would remember, but I also use a lot of decks, so I can't remember what way the man's looking on this. Let's find it real quick. Let's find it. So here's the, and she's beautiful, right? She's so beautiful, but she's got that posture of this beautiful, again, what you would think of as sort of Victorian era idea of this beautiful, sweet, demure lady who's looking down. And then the man, let's find him. Yeah, the man's kind of looking ahead and a little bit, I guess, to that. You could kind of think he's looking a little bit this direction, although, so technically you could say, you could make a case that she's looking in this direction and his eyes are kind of looking in that direction, but in a grand tableau that's not very clear, right? And so number one, you don't really have to use directionality. I will make a case in Kipper, directionality is key and important. It's part of the system in a real strong way. Lenormand directionality is a little less so. It's very hit or miss. So you might have a little directionality here. You may have some directionality with the rider, but again, sometimes the riders are going in all different directions. And you may have some direction, you used to in the olden days, have some directionality with the book, whether it was open, whether it was closed, and what side the bindings were on. That's hit or miss depending on what's going on. Same thing with the coffin. You used to have a little bit more of directionality with the coffin, and where there used to be sort of like a blanket or something that was draped across the coffin that people would use in some form of directionality as well. You don't get that. You get all kinds of coffins going in all different directions. So there aren't as many directional cards in Lenormand as there are in Kipper. And so that becomes a choice for you to just simply choose, especially right now. If you are completely new to Lenormand, I wouldn't be worrying about directionality. I wouldn't be, as another, and we're going to be talking today is all about other things that you can add on. I'm not a proponent of throwing the kitchen sink at a reading, right? If you do every single thing that you could do to a reading, you are going to end up with a mess, right? You're going to have so much information that it's no longer useful because it's taking you on all these different directions. So I think that part of becoming comfortable with Lenormand is getting really comfortable at what we talked about last week. What are the three things in the corner giving you a general reading? What are your corners? What's your essence line or your essence line at the bottom? I have to remember to do a 8x4+4 today. Somebody poke me if I don't. What is your essence line there? Where's your significant, and how do we look at the general information? Where's work? Where's relationships? Where are those key situations, and how do we look at those? That's enough information for anybody for quite some time, right? Stick there and get comfortable with that before you start doing all of the add-on things, because it's just like tarot. I know most of you read tarot. If you look at some decks, I don't think I have it out right now, but if you look at like the Hermetic tarot or something like that, where literally it looks like somebody threw up symbols onto a card, and there's so many layers of astrology and Kabbalah and just the elemental system and just everything you can think of layered on top of the bones of tarot. And it can get to the point in which if you're not comfortable with all those aspects, you're just making a mess for yourself, and you're going to get frustrated and you're going to get overwhelmed, and your message isn't going to be clear because you're just kind of all over the place. So if you are completely new to Lenormand, when you walked into this class, you want to stop. I mean, look, pay attention and look at what we're doing today, because it's fun. These are fun little add-ons, and I'll talk about which ones I use and which ones I don't use. But in terms of moving forward, you want to stay at last week's lesson, so lesson 4. You want to stay there until you're comfortable doing a grand tableau and getting that information, because that by itself is plenty of information. And there are people who never do anything further than what we did last week. Most of the time, I don't do anything further than what we did last week, and you get lots of information and plenty of information to answer the questions. Now, this is a class, so I wanted you to walk away with the information to be able to try different things and have that information at your disposal. But you shouldn't, number one, use everything at once. And number two, you don't have to. Literally, you can stop at week 4 and just do that in a grand tableau, and you are reading Lenormand, and you're reading Lenormand well, and you are getting information that you need. So yeah, and you can, and like Wendy says, you can go back, because remember, these aren't going anywhere. The video links will be up for as long as I am around. The video links will be up. And so you can say, okay, I'm going to watch this. I'm going to kind of take it in, see what other options are there. But in my practice, stay with those basic steps that we've already talked about. And then when you start to say, okay, you know, I'd like to add that one thing that was kind of interesting to me, I'm going to add that one in. And you add one thing in that makes sense sometimes for the reading, which we'll talk about as we go through these. Some of these extra things that we add on, such as directionality and knighting and all this kind of stuff, some of those things are going to, you know, the certain one will make sense for the situation. And so you'll just do that because it makes sense for this particular situation because of the question that you're trying to get out of it. So yeah, so that's an important point. So I appreciate whoever made my brain think of that, take all this in, understand that in any condensed class, overwhelm is part of the, I've taken many spring classes when I was in college, and it's just just letting it all come in and knowing you're going to have to sort a lot of it out later so that you can and figure out where you need to land at, which I'm telling you is last week. So learning to check the first 3, check the corners, check the diagonals, check the significator, and then go where you want to go for your particular answers. Stay there until you feel real comfortable with that, and then start to add things in. Okay, so let us, my rambling point is that if you're new to Lenormand and you're feeling overwhelmed, you're right where you should be. You really are where you should be, right? This is it's just think tarot. Nobody learns how to read tarot in 4 or 5 weeks and feels like they can go out and become a professional reader, right? That's just not going to happen. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work to get to where you're really comfortable with the system. What you should hopefully know by the end of 6 weeks is whether Lenormand feels like, even if you're overwhelmed, so you got to take the overwhelm, step back from the overwhelm, but does the system feel like something that interests you? Does it sort of click with you on some level that you want to put the work in? So you should have a solid grasp on whether or not the system itself, how it works, and whether or not you feel like it's something that you want to put more time into. Because if it does, if it's clicking on some level and you like the types of answers that you get or the way that it functions and works, then you're like, okay, this is something I'm interested in. So now I've got to put in the time, and I've got to start to really just lay the cards out over and over again to get as comfortable as you might be with another system that you've read for a long time. So you should at least have in 6 weeks a solid idea of how to do things, and then whether or not you want to continue to build that. Let's go ahead here. System does click, but if I do that, I have to get up at 4:30 a.m. early. Yeah, no, I hear you. But it may not be as like doing a grand tableau. Like you might just before you go to bed, throw down 9 cards and just let your brain quickly look at it. So you're just keeping your brain into the system. You don't really have to spend a ton of time. I mean, think about it with guitar. If you learn to play an instrument, 30 minutes, right? 30 minutes, and you don't need that to do a 9-card reading. You don't even need 30 minutes. So, if you just kind of say, okay, I'm going to give myself 15 minutes, either at the beginning or the end of the day, or pack in my purse, and on break, just throw a couple cards down. Or again, thankfully, they do have some good Lenormand apps that, you know, at least let you throw out a 9 card on it and kind of play around with what these things are meaning. I think that that's the key, is just consistently at least popping them out on the table so that your brain is making connections and doing those kinds of things. It's a bonus of early retirement. There you go. There you go. And yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Okay, so let's go. Okay, I need to. Oh, nice. I just got my Lenormand's cost spread. Nice, nice, nice. I did not pull out. I think I have one down there. I can grab when we go hands down. It won't fit on my table to show. I've got two. Oh, there you go. And Teresa, that's the Medea, isn't it? Yeah, I've got that one. I have, I think, the Ciro Marchetti one. Somebody sent me a Ciro Marchetti one, and then I have what my friend who is German, she sent me, she handmade one that has the German names on them, which is beautiful. I don't ever use mine, sadly, just because they don't fit in my, like, how I record, but the Medea is really pretty, and the deck is gorgeous. That's the same cardstock as my deck, because I loved the cardstock of the Medea Lenormand so much. Okay, let's see. Now we're trying to get me off track talking about decks. All right, so let us swap. Oh, it has both versions. That's nice. That's very nice. She keeps sniffing hers. Yeah, it would be nice to get a mini one. I haven't seen one, Jasmine, where they had like a mini house set. That would be really handy, because then it's not so big. And use it with your mini decks. It's smaller. I'll have to. I'm sure somebody has done. Oh, it is for the mini deck. There, nice, Anna Tree. You'll have to give me the dimensions. That's right. You said the Revolution is in mini now. I'm gonna have to order that for sure. I love that deck so much. Okay, let us share two here. And there we go. You can again hit escape if your screen has gotten thrown large. And let's hit play. So I'm not going to repeat. I'm very bad at it. I'm definitely a repeater, but I'm not going to repeat too much. But I do want to, in case somebody who's watching back just sort of starts where we are right here, I want to reiterate the fact that if you are new to Lenormand, last week's class, so week 4, where we go over the basic steps to reading a grand tableau, that is a very good and important place to stop in terms of your practice, right? In terms of what you're going to actually be doing going forward, that's a very solid place to stop and simply do your readings from there. The stuff that we're going to talk about today are other things that you can add in, and we'll talk about some more next week, although next week we're going to talk about timing, how you can do maybe a timing chart. There's a way to just cast a grand tableau just for the sake of getting timing down. So we'll be talking about some other things like that next week. But sorry, I'm going to clean my glasses so I can actually see. But you know, you can get various books that are going to give various different extra things that you can add on to how you read a grand tableau, and that's going to really come down to figuring out what's like, oh yeah, you know, that really makes sense to my brain. I'm going to go ahead and do XYZ because that makes sense to me, right? But don't ever, I don't think there's really ever an occasion other than just playing, right? If you're just playing around and trying to see what connects with you, then I can see doing everything and saying, okay, I'm just gonna lay a grand tableau out and I'm going to just play around with all of these things. Definitely, that's a great thing to do, because if you're just playing, there's no stress on yourself. You're just trying to see how that particular thing works for you. But in terms of an actual reading, there's never a time in which I do all of these things to get a reading out. Number one, it would take a lot of time. It would cost a client a lot of money because I would have to spend a lot more time to do every single thing. And number two, I actually don't think it's necessary. I think most of the time you're getting the information that you need. And then if something jumps out where like, oh, like this is interesting, but I don't feel like I don't really have a full grasp on it. I want to dig a little bit deeper, then I might go deeper and I might change something. I might knight that. I might do these different things because I want to dig the layers a little bit deeper because it's just not completely solid. Or this is the key that I'm trying to get out of it. So I'm going to follow it to the, ends of the earth. But when we lay some cards on the table, I will show you, what I generally do in a reading. Okay, so let's get going here. And I could have stopped here. Remember, if you use every single possible tool to read a tableau all of the time, you can end up in a muddle. It's just like a toolbox, right? If you've got a toolbox at home with all kinds of tools in it, every time you go to hang a picture, you don't use every single tool in the toolbox, right? You're finding the appropriate tool for the occasion. And so these are just tools to be able to put at the occasion, depending on what the situation is that you're trying to get. So clearly, I spoke before looking. And I will be honest with you, I'm kind of going over traditional ones that I've learned at one time or another. And I will tell you the ones that I find helpful and the ones that I don't personally find helpful. And that doesn't mean that the same thing's going to be occur for you. You might actually find other ones that are more helpful and useful to you than what I find for myself. But the most I would say popular or the most well-known and the most used of these sort of additional layers would be the houses. So as we talked about in the very first class, this was a system. It was a game that was originally laid out in the order. So the cards were not mixed up. They were laid out in order. As far as we know, now let's be honest, the instructions that we have are, fairly concise. Let's just peek at that real quick while I say that. But I think that it's sort of vague in terms of 6 rows. No, it says actually according to the numbers on top of the cards. That is 1, 2, 3, and so on to 36. So it does actually state that it was laid down in the order of the cards from 1 to 36 in a 9x4 grid. So it made a playing board, just like when you pull out. Does Life have a playing board? I think so. It's been a while. Monopoly or something like that has a board where instead of laying out an actual board like that, they laid the cards out to create the board, and so they would move along the way following those spaces. Yeah, Candyland. Thank you. That's how I would say I would probably say it was closest to like Candyland. That is so awesome. Chris, you should have taken a picture and sent it to me. We're definitely going to do it. That's going to be our sort of wrap up the class as we're going to play it. But yeah, so my point being though, that originally the way that it was set up was to have the houses laid out in order as we see with the house system. And so what you can do now, other than that, remember, other than one line, we can actually see what it says, one line that says basically, you can also use this as divination, blah, 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 structure, oops. We gotta find the actual instructions. There we go. I'm trying to find where it actually says. It might be at the very end of the game. Yes, with these same cards, it is also possible to play an entertaining game of oracles by shuffling the 36 cards and then letting the person for whom the oracle is meant cut the cards and then laying the cards in, oh, there we go, 5 rows with 4 and 8 each, so a 8x4 plus 4 in terms of divination with the remaining 4 cards. And it goes and explain it. So in the original oracle instructions, if you may, they didn't lay these on top of a house system. They didn't do layers on top of it. So they just shuffled them, laid them out as you did last week. So this kind of thing that we're talking about now is something that has been added in as time has progressed since this deck came out in 1799. We know it was a remake, so obviously the first one was made before that time. But from 1799 to 2018, it has developed into having certain people in their family, the way their family reads, or certain provinces or areas in Germany or France, and now moving into other countries, right? That people have developed their own extra things that they've added on top of it. And so even the house system, in terms of having the houses and then shuffling and putting the cards on top of the house system, is an additional thing that has been layered on top of the original intention of the deck. So always keep that in mind, that just because you don't use these extra things doesn't mean you're not actually reading Lenormand, because you are. Reading Lenormand is shuffling the cards, laying them down, and reading them, and that's what you're already doing. So, and I try to stress that, because unfortunately, whenever you have a traditional system, it doesn't matter what it is, tarot, runes, OMs, whatever it is, if there's a long tradition of something, there will be people in forums that are very militaristic, that are very, this is the way to do it, and if you don't do it this way, you're not doing Lenormand correctly. You will get a lot of that, unfortunately, in some forums, because people are very passionate, I guess, about their systems and how they do it, but they forget, I think, very often that most of everything that they're saying that makes it something different is something that's been layered on and added on and isn't actually traditional. It might be traditional in their area or that kind of thing, but it's not part of the Lenormand Bible. And I have lots and lots of people who message me that say, they said, oh, so-and-so said this, and if you don't do it this way, you know, that I'm doing it wrong, or that I'm not really a Lenormand reader. That kind of stuff irritates me to the nth degree, because there's a sense of elitism, there's a sense of my way or the highway, and what makes it for me ridiculous is that all of those things are things that have been layered on and become traditions, but they can't actually claim those things as being the one and only way, because all you're going to do is shuffle and throw them on the table and do X, Y, Z. It's quite simple. The base things are quite simple. So I know I've said it multiple times, but I want to be really clear about that. And the same thing goes with the way that I read, right? So obviously you're taking my class, so I am walking you through the way that I read. But in the end, as long as you're being consistent, as long as you have taken the time to think through how you're reading things, so that you actually are doing it with intention, you're not just kind of throwing it down and making up the rules. As long as you have some form of an understanding of how you're reading, there's just not a right and wrong way of doing readings. So of any system, certainly even with Lenormand. Okay, so let's go forward. I know lots of qualifications, but I think it's important because there's a lot of things out there, because for so long we didn't really have any books in English, even the base, we didn't have this. This is a recent that we even had this finding here, recent as in the last couple years, and certainly having English books, even to the basic Lenormand deck where we had that was always in German. So that means that there's a lot of internet information that has accumulated before some concrete information started to be translated. And so I think that it can be really confusing when doing internet searches sometimes, and it can be really confusing sometimes getting in these forums where you do have really intensely passionate people about the way that they read being the one and only way. And so if you bump into that, my advice is just to kind of step quietly away, maintain eye contact, do not run, but back away slowly. Okay, stop. So houses. What the system of houses means is that if you lay your cards out from 1 to 36, whether you do it 9x4 or the 8x4 plus 4 at the bottoms, are there any forms that you'd recommend? Not really. I'll be honest, I'll try to think about it. I don't actually go into a lot of forums. If I am in a research mode, I might look in, like if I was researching Marseille reading tarot in a Marseille style, I might go in just for research purposes and kind of looking, but I don't actually, I'm not active on a lot of forums. I have some Facebook groups I'm in, but those are more fun. Really the main one is Be for Love of Cards, and that's literally just more for fun and looking at decks and things like that. So I just find in general, and this is just from, you know, X number of years since I started in news groups way back in the day, that wherever you have people that band together surrounding a particular topic, you do tend to get some elitism and some my way is the highway kind of thing versus open-mindedness, which is too bad, right? And I'm sure there are some good ones out there. It's just not something, time is limited, and that's not how I really choose to mostly spend my time. So I'll try to see if I can get some good examples, but I'm probably the worst person to ask about that. Okay, so in terms of what the houses mean, and this is, again, everything is qualified, and I don't say that to be wishy-washy, it's just simply the truth because you have different systems. Most people interpret the houses similar to the cards or to the individual cards. So for example, the house of the ship would just simply be the house of the journey, right? So that if you were looking for and we'll show this a little bit more when we lay them down. But let's say you were going to get ready to go on a journey. You have two ways to look at that. You can look for the card that you've laid out, which is the journey, you know, wherever that ship is on the grand tableau. Or, and not even just or, but and you can go to the third in the grand tableau, you can go to the third position and see what card is in the house of the journey, and that can give you some more information about what's going on surrounding the journey. Same thing with work. Okay, obviously we already learned last week to go find the anchor card or whichever card you're using for work and look around it. But then we can also go down to the 35th position where the anchor is and see what card is in that house, and that's going to tell us some more. So the houses gives us, just from the get-go, it gives us two. Now, instead of just one place to look, now we have two places that we can look surrounding a particular topic that we're going to talk about. It also adds what I would say is a position, right? So similar to tarot, if you have a past, present, and future, and you lay out a card on the past and a card on the present and a card on the future, you're now looking at that card in the past. So if it's the Three of Cups and it's in the position of the past, we're not just interpreting the Three of Cups, but we're interpreting the Three of Cups with the lens on. We put on our glasses of looking through the past, right? So now we're talking about celebration and coming together with people who are supportive, but we're looking at that in terms of things that happened in the past. So we've added a lens to the way that we're looking at that card. The houses functions very similar to positions, right? So if I am looking at the anchor card, which is about work, but I'm looking at it and it's in the house of the cross. So now I'm looking at the anchor card with the lens of difficulties, that there's some weights on it, that there is some, there is a heaviness or a weightedness surrounding the work situation. So it's giving us another flavor to the card. The card that is laid on top, so your card that you have shuffled and you have laid out, are always the primary card, right? The message does not get completely flip-flopped because of what the house is in. That card that you laid out is the most of the card on top, so to speak. That's the main card. What's underneath it is a layer. It's an additional way that you can start to interpret and look at the card, but it does not supersede the card on the top, if that makes sense. So I'm trying to make sure I'm looking through this again. So yeah, so the house is going to modify the card that's on top, but it's not going to just turn it on its back. So this is a good example. Let's say we're talking about looking at where the sun is. The sun is a really powerful, happy card, right? And so let's say the sun was in the position of the clouds. Now, the clouds is also a powerful negative card in terms of our spectrum, right? And so the clouds doesn't turn the sun on its back and say that there is no now happiness, joy, or abundance. It just puts a layer that says, okay, there's a lot of happiness, there's a lot of good things coming your way, there's a lot of growth and all of the wonderful thing, confidence we can think of with the sun, but it may not be clear where that's coming from or how that's going to come about because it's in the position of the cloud. So the cloud doesn't destroy the sun and say, now we have no happiness, this is a negative now. No, it just gives us some added information so we can say, yeah, but things may not be overly clear surrounding where this happiness is going to come from or how it's going to come about, but it's still there. So the house is never going to completely obliterate the message that's on the top. One of the things that I love to see is when you have the card in its own house. That's something I do look for. So, and of course it doesn't matter if it's just some random card, but if in the course of going through, okay, I'm looking at relationships and I go find the heart and the heart is in the house of the heart, that's always something that I do pay attention to because it's like it puts an exclamation point on it. It says, whoa, right? This is a lot of passion, right? So we have love, but this is love that has been amplified to the nth degree. And so sun in the house of the sun is the sun doubled, right? So it gives you a lot of power to that particular card because it is in its own house. That gives it extra strength there. And so, and then it talks about, I mentioned here, you know, again, the other thing is if you're kind of confused, you're looking at something and okay, over here in this past position, we have the coffin card and you're kind of like, that's interesting. I don't really know what to connect that with. Like it's not really, nothing's clicking yet. Okay, well look at the house and see what house that's in because it might give you a field of view. Like let's say you have coffin and you're like, oh, something that ended in the past. Well, there's probably lots of things that ended in the past. So I might look underneath there and say, oh, okay, well that's in the house of the heart. So okay, this is about a relationship that ended in the past. And so it starts to give me more information, and that can also start a chain, which we'll talk about obviously as we go through here. So the houses, I think, are really important. I think that the key here is, I should have had this out, but let me grab it. The key is that you don't go through, you don't start with number one and work your way through every single card on a grand tableau and looking at its house. That's not, you know, what's important is what's around our significator. So we're still paying attention to where our significators are and the houses that those might be in. We're not reading the entire board off of every time at the house. The other thing is that if you have laid out a reading and you didn't put it on a spread cloth or you didn't do it, you can still do your houses. Just have yourself a handy dandy list of what the houses are, and whether you laid it on a spread cloth or not, and you're like, oh shoot, like I don't really know what that is, but and I didn't lay it in the houses or whatever, just look it up. Where, okay, oh yeah, that coffin's in the house of the heart. So ooh, I'm looking at past relationship that ended that's still impacting me today. All you need to look at the houses, I know I said this last week, but I want to make sure this week as you look at it, you don't need a spread cloth. You don't even need 2 decks of cards. You still only need 1 deck of cards. And then just like in my little white book of stuff, I have the 8x4 plus 4, and I have the 9x4, so that I can always reference, because I will be honest with you, everybody's different. I have a very hard time with just rote memorization. I can remember themes and philosophies and structures and all kinds of things that my brain does really well, but my brain does not do very well at just like to sit down and just name all of the cards out in their order is not something that I can access quickly in my brain. It's not because I'm old, which I'm getting there, but my brain's always been that way. It just doesn't function well that way. So having something like this is really helpful because that's not cheating. That's just you telling your brain, okay, shoot, where's that one? Okay, yeah, it's in the house of the bear. And you go on about your business. Make sure you just have that handy reference for you. And whether or not you lay down a cloth or you lay down 2 sets of decks of cards or not isn't going to matter. You can still do the houses without any other implements than 1 deck of cards. So I want to make sure that was clear, because I do know some people just have a deck of cards because they are far more restrained than I am. And truthfully, I don't read with a lot of decks of cards. I have a lot, but I mean, I keep them out either. So I don't ever, so I guess my point being is that when I do say grand tableau for somebody, for a client, I don't ever lay it on a reading cloth, and I don't ever lay out double cards. I used to. I want to say that when I first started reading professionally, I think I did used to lay a smaller deck out on a larger deck, but I don't really do that anymore. I just lay the deck out, and then I have that reference there to be able to reference if I need to. Or again, some of the things I just know where they're at, but if I don't, if it's like a blank, you just go look over there and bam, there it is. So I don't actually use spread cloths for client readings, and it's not because I don't like them. I'm going to definitely look into a mini one, but it's because it just doesn't fit in. They're generally larger, and they don't fit in my reading space. And it's not necessary for those of you who are just wanting to play around with it. Babbling, queen of babbling. Let me just make sure there wasn't anything. And also verify the rest of the reading. Yeah, very nice, Kim. Yeah, Kim was just saying that, yeah, being able to look at the tree card, but then also look at the house and see what was in there. That is an amazing way to look at things. And that's probably a primary, good, solid way just to use the houses in that way, is to look at your significator, but then go to the house of your significator and see what's in there. And that's going to give you more information. So yeah, no, and again, you could just say, you know what, that works really well for me. And that might end up being the only thing you ever do with the houses, and it will have served its purpose. So it can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. Some people love chaining, which we're going to talk about next, where you're following all of these trails. To other people, you're like, what, why are we doing this? And how is this helping me? So it really comes down to understanding that readings are about you getting messages in such a way that your brain doesn't kind of block you or stop you from being able to get those messages. So you want to use the things that help you to gain those messages and not use things that kind of shut your brain down and stops you from receiving those messages. And that's going to be different for everybody. So just because me or some other person that wrote a book on Lenormand, remember also about books. In terms of a book, a person is going to try to give you as much information as they can give you. So they're going to put everything that they can, that they know about Lenormand, into that book for you. Same thing with taking a class. I want to make sure that you have access to all kinds of information and all kinds of ways you can use things. That's because we're trying to make sure in a book or a class or something like that, that we've provided you with the information needed. It doesn't mean that that person uses every single thing in there, nor does it mean that you necessarily need to. It's just something for you to go back to. Anyways, I already said that. So let's talk about chaining, because I actually do use chaining. I don't use it a ton, and I'm not a proponent of chaining everything all over the place because it starts to get really crazy. I'm also not a big proponent of going too far away from the original card. It's just like everything with Lenormand in terms of proximity, which is something the near and far we'll touch on a little bit next week. That's something different, and we'll talk a little bit more about that next week and sort of like extra things for the last week. But proximity in Lenormand is something that I pay attention to. So whenever you have your significator card, the things that are closest are always going to be more relevant. So I don't chain 10 cards away. That 10th, you start getting far away, those things are a lot less relevant than the things that are at the beginning when you're first connecting that chain. And so that I think is really important. Now, other people might want to chain it to Kingdom Come, and will literally chain it until it comes back around to the original card, which can be a long time sometimes. I don't find that to be overly helpful, and I think it does sort of go against the understanding of proximity with Lenormand. It's gotten too far away to still be able to be relevant to the current situation. Now, I will say this, if you are somebody who does believe in a fixed future, right? So that you don't believe that the future is shift. I mean, I think everybody who believes there are people who believe in fixed futures. They don't necessarily believe that nothing can wiggle at all, but that in general, we can look forward and see exactly what's going to happen. Then I can see perhaps the argument for chaining it all the way out to its end, because you're not seeing the future as in flux. So I will say that in that case, maybe you would want to chain it all the way to Kingdom Come. Because I believe that things shift and change, the further away that you're going to get away from it, the less stable that future is, the less that you can say with any degree of certainty that that's relevant, if that makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense. So some of it, remember from the first lesson, you need to understand how you see the future working. You need to know for yourself, how do you see readings work? Why do you do readings, and what do you think they're effective at? Like understanding the way that you approach divination in general will help you to determine the things that you're going to do as you are doing divination things. It can change the way. So for me, because I believe things are in flux, getting too far away doesn't make sense, because those things are going to start to not be stable. But for another reader who may believe in a fixed future, then chaining out a ways might make very good sense because of the way that they see the world. Different you're going to follow a different line of logic depending on the way that you view the world and the way that you do your readings. Also, I wouldn't even say fixed future only. Let's say there are people who do readings and they don't believe that it's coming from themselves, or like from myself dropping into the collective unconscious, but they're actually contacting, let's say, spirit guides or divinity, like they're having a direct connection with something that is divine or outside of themselves. Then chaining further might make sense, because obviously all of that information to them would be important, because it's information coming from that particular source. Does that make sense? How you see readings working is going to affect the way that you read, is my point. Hopefully that made some degree of sense, but let's come back here to chaining. So what a chain means is that you are using the house system to create links, to link cards together in a chain. So for this example on the screen, we go to the woman card, right? So we're going to start with the significator, in this case, the significator of the lady. And here we have the woman card here, and she is in the house of the whip. So I say to myself, okay, here's the woman. You know, I've already done probably all my other things. I've gone through the 9 card and, you know, did my thing. Now I'm like, I'm peeking, I'm saying, okay, the woman's in the house of the whip. So in general, we're seeing somebody who's maybe stuck in a pattern that is not being helpful to them right now. It's probably a pattern they've done before. It's a repetition. They're kind of stuck in this cycle that they probably need to break out of, in all fairness. So I'm saying, okay, let's get some more information about that. So then I'm going to go to the whip card. So the woman's in the house of the whip. So we say, okay, where's the whip? So in this deck, it's the broom. Broom and the whip are the same cards. So I find the broom card here, or the whip card, and say, okay, what house is the whip in? Well, the house is in the whip. The whip is in the house of the mountain, right? So this being stuck in a repetitive pattern is really an obstacle for them. It's blocking them from being able to move forward. Like, okay, that's giving me some more information. So now let's go find the mountain. Well, here's the mountain up here. Obstacles. Okay, what's going on with it? Oh, it's not really clear what this obstacle is. It's in the house of the clouds. So we've got her being stuck in a repetitive cycle. It's definitely a blockage for her, but how is it blocking her? How is that blockage affecting her? It's not super clear because we're in the clouds. So we go to the clouds and see, well, the clouds is in the house of the house. So this is blocking her feeling of security, the feeling of being safe in her own space, right? This is in some way stopping her from being in a place of security. And so, okay, well, let's, keep going here, and we find the house, and now the house is in the house. The house is in the house of the fox. So then you can say, okay, well, yeah, she's gonna have to be really smart. She's gonna have to think outside of the box to get herself around this situation. And I would probably stop there. So we've gone 1, 2, 3, 4. In general, I will kind of stop around. My general rule is about 3 steps away is giving me some good information. 4, sometimes like this one, if it ends up with something that at least gives some actionable information, like, okay, the fox is here, we've got to pay attention, maybe get some advice from somebody else. She's going to have to think outside the box. The lane she's in is not working. She's going to have to break out of that. So I've gotten some actionable information, and I'm going to stop there. I don't generally ever go past that. That's by the furthest that I would go. Because again, the farther away that you get from this woman here, the less solid that information is, so the less helpful that information is in the way that I read. Now, sometimes you have where the chain will come back to the original card relatively quickly, and that's important. I think we had an example of that last week, where let's say the woman is in the house of the whip, and we go to the whip, and the whip is in the house of the woman. And so we have this direct link between, again, that puts sort of an exclamation point between those 2 cards. Even sometimes you might chain 2 or 3 away and link the man and the woman card together in a relationship reading, and that again puts a link. So that's something that you would pay attention to if you can link either 2 cards that are important, like the man and the woman card, or the woman in the work card. If it's a work question, somebody's looking to get work, and we directly, relatively quickly link up to the work card, that gives us some more, like, again, pay attention, because there's a direct link here, if that makes sense. Does the chaining reading ever conflict with the first steps in the reading? No. Well, for me, no. So that's a very good question, Colleen. So for me, the order in which we're doing things speaks to it builds on each other, right? So if I've done, you know, the first three, so the first three, the corners and the middle are sort of a generalness. So that kind of sets itself off as this is a general overall reading that we've gotten, right? So if in that general overall reading, we get great cards, things are coming up roses, things are going to get better, we see a progression to things being great. And then we go into the specific significator cards and we see some negative things, that doesn't negate the fact that overall things are moving in a positive direction, right? So that's sort of its general step. Then I go into what we talked about last week, where you're going into the significators. I'm looking at those corners and looking at the cross. That's a solid reading around that particular card, that particular significator. The chaining and these types of things that we're doing here are going to give us further information, but it should be building on the information that you already got. It's not going to turn on its head the message that you've already received. Hopefully that makes sense. So it's sort of building and modifying, but it's not ever going to take over the step before it and change that reading. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to sort of get into this a rhythm with doing a reading, that you're doing it in the steps that we've talked about. And the part of that reasoning is because you don't want to say, okay, I've done these steps. Okay, I'm looking at the woman card and we've got this going on. I do generally at the very beginning, you know, when I'm first looking at the significator card, I do peek at the house that's underneath it, because for me, that's part of that initial reading. But other than that, I don't really start to chain or night or do anything like that until I've already done the bulk of the reading. And all that's going to do is allow me to have further information about something that I want to dig deeper, but it's not going to supersede it and change what I've already read. I hope that answers your question, Colleen. I hope maybe while we do an example, that will be helpful to make that more clear. But they build on, think of the steps as building on each other, but it doesn't knock off the row behind it that you've already interpreted. So this is chaining. Again, it's better if we get it on the table and you can actually see it. One of the things that you can do is, if you like to do 9 cards and you're not really interested, I was doing something. If you're not really interested in doing a grand tableau, you can take 2 decks, shuffle one, lay out the 9 card as the house is, then shuffle the other one and lay it on top of that. And now you have houses within the 9 card, if that makes sense. So now you have made, I do too, Anna Teresa. She said that, well, I think she came private to me, but this deck that's with the stock photos is my friend Bart's. Eventually he intends to put it up. I think he's writing the guidebook, but I do love it as well. People ask me about it all the time. It's not something that you can get yet, but it definitely will eventually be if I just keep hounding him. But obviously for copyright reasons, I'm able to use it. So that's why it's used in the class. Anyways, so that is, I do this? No, to be honest, I don't do this. And that's simply because, I get enough information. You know, 9 card is usually much more of a focused reading, and I get enough information that I need out of it. And so having random houses, while I do think it's neat and it's something to try, and some people may click with it and really love that. For me, it's just not necessary. It's one like extra step that I don't think is actually necessary. It's certainly an option, and I have read a lot of people enjoy doing this way. So again, it's one of those things, lay them out, and we'll do that real quick, when we shift down. It gives you a position, but for me, the 9 card already builds in positions, right? We already have the past, present, and future. We already have what's going on above, what's going on below. We already have the cross here giving us some essential linear movement. So I feel like we already have the top left corner as sort of a thematic place. So I feel like there's already positions that are built in. And so it just doesn't make as much sense for me to do that. But it is something that you can do if you just want to use the house system, but you're not really interested in, or that day perhaps you don't want to lay out a full grand tableau. So I did want to at least point that out. As with everything, try it and see if it resonates with you, and if it does, use it, right? Knighting and mirroring are two other things. Now, these I use very sparingly. Chaining I use sparingly as well, but I would say that of all of these, I probably chain the most of all of these extra things. I use the houses, again, as I said last week, only in the significant ways for the significators. I don't look at the house of everything, but I will peek at the house of the significant cards that I'm looking at. I might then look to the house of that significant. So again, if I was work, I might look to the house of the anchor and see what card is in there. So I do use the houses in that way. I chain when I want to get some extra information, when I want to try to find a connection for something, or I just want to see where something is headed. So I do use chaining in a limited sense. Those two things are the things that I would use the most out of what we're talking about now. I do sometimes knight, but it's, again, just when I'm just wanting some extra information. And so knighting is where we take the movement of a chess piece. So the knight in chess moves in a certain way. So let's take a look at the left, the grand tableau chart, and you can see the ring is surrounded by blue. So that's our main card here in this particular chain. A knight moves 1, 2, and then it can either move left or right. That's how a knight in a chess game works. And so you move sort of like imaginary movement. You're not really moving, but you're kind of as if you had a playing piece right here, and you go 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3 to the right. This provides a pair of cards. If you go left and right, we now have a pair of cards because we don't generally read with a single card. So my personal rule of thumb is if I don't end up with 2 cards because of the way it's positioned, I don't knight. And so in this case, we have clouds and coffin. So here we have the ring, which is a long-term committed relationship. And if I knight and look at like what's going on above things, we can see that while things are cloudy, that cloudiness is kind of becoming to an end, right? From behind this, we can see the fox here, that they're needing to, that maybe in the past have had to really be smart about things in terms of relationships, have had to really think outside the box in order to make things work. And they might, and have had to really trust their instinct, or in order for the things in their relationship to rise up, which the moon talks about rising. Again, this isn't a real question, so I'm just kind of throwing something out there, right? But this might indicate the fact that in order for things to have progressed with that relationship, there's had to be be really smart about how they've managed things in the past. Knighting forward, we can see a real connection of trust and loyalty that it may be tested in the future, may have some weight on it, or that trust and loyalty is a weight, right? So we have the friendship card, trust and loyalty, and then we have the cross. So is that trust a weight in that relationship? Perhaps there are issues with trust and trusting somebody to be loyal to them, and that aspect in that relationship has become a weight or a heaviness, and it's going to continue on into the future because we're moving, this knighting is going forward into the future. So it's just another way to pull out more information. I don't use knighting all of the time because I already have future cards, right? So let's just kind of step backwards for a minute. When we look at this 9 card, so this, I'm sorry, look here. So this is the ring. If we look at this 9 card here, I've got an overall theme. I have some corner cards that give us some important information. I have the cross around here, which gives me a sort of linear progression. I have cards in the past. I have cards in the future. And so I have a direct card in the past that's really impacting things. I have a direct card in the future that's impacting things. So now we're going further out into the future. right, with this, which can give us some more information. But I do already have a future position. So I don't always use knighting because I want to stay really solid with the information that I have. And I find that I get a lot of information from way that I do things. And so I only knight if there's just some reason for it. I kind of will peek at it and see, okay, well, that seems like that's really relevant. Or if we're trying to figure out what's going on in the foundation of things, then I might go ahead and knight. Or if I've done the future things, but there's some whatever issues that made me think we really need to pay more attention to the future, then I might knight forward even further. So it's really all of these extra techniques are used to pull out some more information when I need more information than what I've already gotten for some reason. Would I use knighting if the significator is on the edge? No, because if let's say this cross right here is a significator. If I go 1, 2, 3, and then this way, I can't get 2 cards. If I go to the past, I can't get 2 cards. If I go below, I can't get any cards. If I go to the future, I can't get any cards. So my particular rule of thumb, you don't have to have that rule of thumb, but my particular rule of thumb is if I can't get 2 cards from the knighting, it's not relevant information for me. So that's knighting. That's what it is. And now sometimes I will say this, sometimes it's interesting. Let's take this ring again. If we knight up here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, we're going over here. We have the clouds and we have the coffin. It is sometimes interesting to look at the card that's between them. So if we have the cards, the clouds or the things that are clear ending, looking at what's in between those two might give you some more information on how it's going to come about ending. I don't think this is something I ever was taught or read in a book, but for me, I have sometimes found that to be the case, where you're like, okay, well, let's see what's going on in the middle of those two things, because it then can maybe tell what's the link between these two that are going to make this thing occur. Let's say over here, where we have the trust and loyalty being a weight and a burden, it might surround communication, written communication of the letter that might say, okay, we've really got to be very clear about communication and communicating things that would make the other person feel better about trusting things that are going on. So that sometimes peeking in between the 2 cards does give you a little bit of information, not to just pile more information in your brain than you're already getting, but I will sometimes peek between the cards is my point. So when do I use knighting? I use knighting when I can get 2 cards out of the knighting, and I also use knighting when I just, for whatever reason in the midst of the reading, I feel like it's important. It's intuitive, let's be honest. So let's say a person has asked me a question about their relationship, and they've had a lot, and from what they've said and what we've discussed, they've had some difficulties in the past really having an impact on what's going on now. Then I might look to, here's the past cards, but I might knight to the past as well, because that's a primary focus and I want to get everything I can get out of the past information. Same thing moving forward. The person really is concerned that there are going to be problems in the future and really wants to give as far as they can, then I might look to the future cards and future up. Somebody's feeling really shaky in their relationship. Yes, I have the cards below it, but let's dig even deeper below it by knighting below it if I can, depending on how it's positioned. So it really is a intuitive, is it going to give me more information on a specific area that's going to be helpful, is how I choose to decide whether or not I'm going to use any of these extra things. Mirroring is something that I don't use at all, to be honest. It is a traditional factor in Lenormand. It's something that you can see. By traditional, I mean, it's not something traditional in terms of how it was originally used, but it is something that you hear talked about in certain books or in certain traditions. And this is where you might mirror. And so I find mirroring to be more useful in a 9 card than in a grand tableau, but let's just talk about it for a second. So mirroring is basically if you take the spread, whatever the spread may be, and fold it in half, what cards are going to be smack touching each other? So for example, if you look at this grand tableau, if we took this grand tableau and folded it in half, right? Congratulations on your car being fixed, Lloyd. He's got to run out. But if you folded that in half, the rider, all of the, well, let's just take it, this whole first column would be mirrored by the last column, because if you folded it together, those cards would be touching each other. And so you're kind of taking the furthest and the one over here and the one over here, and you are finding a connection between those two. I don't find that overly useful in a grand tableau. We're already doing the corners, which in some ways is a sort of a mini mirroring in a way. And so we've already done that. Yeah, I don't particularly find it useful, other than doing the corners is a form of mirroring. So if you look at this 9 card, if you folded it diagonally, the star card and the broom card would be together, and the ring card and the stork card would be together. If you folded it in half, then all of the first column is going to be touching the column in the front. I just don't personally see what further information that's going to give us, because generally we're looking at things in the past and things in the future, and we're connecting those things together anyways. I don't know, if you see this in a different way, I am happy to entertain it. But I just don't find it to be that, yeah, I definitely find it as well. I know that it's taught in books. I know that some people use it and enjoy it. And I did used to use it more when I was first learning. But in the end, I didn't feel like it was going anywhere differently than what I was already doing. Because we did the corners, which I think is the significant mirroring in the case of a 9 card or in the case of the grand tableau. Those I do think, that gives me added information, and it works for me. But other than that, I don't really use mirroring. But I did want to bring it up because you will hear the term mirroring in Lenormand. And some of it I think we're doing without realizing, such as doing the corners. That is a form of mirroring. And so I think that's can be helpful. But, and we already, I tend to already look at the very last column as being sort of the furthest in the future. And I suppose you could do the same thing with the past, furthest in the past on the other, and see how those go by folding it in half. But technically, let's look at this grand tableau. If we fold this grand tableau, all of these 4 columns are going to be mirrored in all of the other 4 columns. The middle row would, of course, be folded in half. I just don't really find that gives us any extra information than what we're already doing. So there you go. There you have it. I wanted to bring it up because you will have heard the term, and I think that you're already mirroring the corners, but that's about as far as I ever take mirroring. So that's that. The diagonals as well. This is another thing that I don't use. I used to use when I first learned to read, because it was something that I picked up in terms of how to read. I also find this to maybe not give me enough information to be helpful. I find either chaining or knighting or something like that to be more useful to get more information versus something like this. But again, it is something that's taught, so I do like to bring it into people's awareness. So what diagonals are where you take, say, the card. So in this tableau, we're looking at the bear card, or not the bear, it's the book card, but it's in the house of the bear. So this card right here is where we're using as our central card. So everything to the left is the past, everything to the right is in the future. What's above it is an influence, it's influencing it, and what's below it are underlying influences. So then if you think about diagonals, they're kind of showing you direct influences, either past or present. There is one spread that I do in Lenormand, and maybe I'll try to remember to do that next week. So for me personally, I do grand tableaus and I do 9 cards. Those are really the only spreads that I do, except for a spread. I'm trying to find a pen, I'm sorry. There's a spread called a star spread. And I really like this, and it does in some ways make use of diagonals, and that's the only time I really use this type of movement. So I will try to get in time to look at that. If that's something that interests people, I will try to slip that in next week. So in this case, the tree here is a past direct influence on the bear. So when we look at the tree, I'm looking at the house, the tower in the tree. So we're really looking at the tower. This tower card is a direct influence going from the tower at the bear. All of diagonals are going at the main card. So in the future, the scythe is a direct future influence on the book. Now, obviously, sorry, I'm gonna look at the middle. The scythe, the fish, and the coffin are all 3 direct influences, future influences. But there is an added emphasis to the scythe coming at this book, as well as the coffin coming at this. Not looking real good for schooling, right? They got a direct future influence from the scythe and an underlying future influence actually by the anchor, the tree, the coffin, and the book. Breathe. See, this, you can tell this is not something I use a lot. I used to use this all the time. I just didn't find that it gave enough extra information, or that it just started to muddy the water. And if something's starting to muddy the water, I just don't use it. I want to get direct, clear, here's the information that I feel comfortable and confident with, and not can just kind of continue to pull and pull and pull until you unravel everything. So yes, I do have a video, I think, because I need to go through my old Lenormand videos, because obviously I've now kind of solidified into how I read really strongly, whereas before I did used to use this. So here again is our bear. Let's step back a minute so we can see this. I want to at least be clear about this. So we have our significator card of the book. Diagonals are coming at the significator. You're not going from the bear outward, you're coming inward towards the bear. So a past underlying issue is the dog and the key, oh my gosh, the fox and the clover coming at the book. So that is a direct underlying influence from the past at that particular significator. The tower coming at the book is a past strong influence that they probably are aware of. And then the same thing going in the other direction. The scythe is direct, coming at it future influence. Underlying future influences, which they may not be quite aware of, might be the tree, the coffin, and the book. Some health problems, right, might actually be a direct future influence. Now, in this scenario, I find the underlying future and past influences to be the most helpful. So if I was going to be using this in a way, I would probably use those what's below, because that again is giving us information that might not be so obvious. And so I find that's part where I could say, well, that to me would be useful to think about what are some underlying influences that directly connect at that significator card that the person that you're reading for may not be clear about. You know, Anna Teresa might be speaking of that I have the star reading. I might have a video on the Lenormand star reading on my channel. I'll put a link. I'll put a link in the email with this if I do have that up there. Because I do like that reading. It's one that I actually do for clients because I enjoy it. So diagonals. Again, think of it as a tool in your toolbox. If you're really looking to see, excuse excuse me, if you're really looking to see some influence, like what are the things that are influencing the situation? I've got a problem at work and I just really need to suss out things that direct influences on this situation. So then you might say, okay, you know, this is a time for me to bring out my diagonals because I really want to get some of that direct correlation and what's directly influencing, especially those underlying issues that I may not realize that is in play, or it needs an exclamation point at those underlying issues that are coming at me from past and coming at me into the future. So it's all about thinking about each one of these extra things and saying, okay, how does this give me pertinent information for this situation, right? And so what of my tools can I apply to that? You may even want to do, this would be a good idea. I think everybody should have a little white book, but let's say you have your little notes and your key information about how reading Lenormand. So you may even make room for like a little place in your thing and say, okay, chaining, this shows me significant links, right? Mirroring, this gives me further details of past, future, above, and below. Diagonals gives me some more highlighted influences on a situation. Houses give me nuance, modifies what I know about what the card is in there already. So you might want to make note of how those things work for you, what information they're going to give you, so that when you're going to do a reading, you can say to yourself, oh, okay, I really could use to see how all of this links together, so I'm going to use chaining. And that way you're not throwing everything at it, but you're pulling out the tool that is going to help you best to get the information that you're looking for, if that makes sense. Let's see. I don't seem to have all of the handouts with the cards, just empty houses. I think that I'll have to look, Colleen. This week, I think, is just empty houses. That is for doing your readings, so that you're going to able to write out your reading. It's like our reading sheet. I think last week you should have a blank with all the houses in it, but I'll make sure of that. And how do I tell myself? Check houses. Handouts. I make these notes to myself, but I need to be able to remember what they mean. But I believe last week should have a blank with the houses in it, and this week should have a blank for you to be able to use for a reading. So if, let's say, you lay out a grand tableau, you're able to write down all of your cards in there, keep your notes to it, so it's more of a reading sheet for you to keep. You can copy over and over again. I have the blank, just not the ones you, oh yeah, all of these images are not in your handout. I try to not make it horribly print intensive. But it should have something to do with diagonal. I'll look over it again, Colleen, and make sure that you have, and if there's something that you don't have that you would find particularly helpful, let me know, because I can pull it over from the slide presentation and get it over to you as a handout. So if there's some particular spread that you would find helpful that's not in your handout, just let me know and I can easily do that for you. Okay, so what time is it? Oh, good. 1:30. I'm like, we need time to do this. We need time to put this into action, right? Yeah, she's just distracted. Yeah, it doesn't have all of the image. I tried to pull out just to show you how diagonals work, but I don't have all of the, again, it gets very print intensive. So I tried to give you the information in the handout, because obviously it's in conjunction with you seeing this in the video, which you can watch back, but have enough in the handout just to kind of jog your memory on how things work. So that's kind of the way that I try to make the handouts be helpful. Let me stop the screen sharing here for a minute. Your husband went on the bathroom break, understandable. Miss Colleen, you are bathed in light as well. You're positively glowing. She is glowing from all of this Lenormand information thrown at her. Okay, let me close this out so that we can see. And let me take another drink. Okay, let me, I know it's right. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's one of my favorite things, actually. While I'm going to talk real quick, but I'm going to, I am going to quickly put one of my decks, which I should have done before. So if you have any specific questions, go ahead and put those up. I'm going to quickly put a deck that has titles on it in order so that I can show you a couple things in terms of houses. The best way to put a Lenormand deck back in order is to make piles of 0 through 10s, 10s, 20s, and 30s, and then you can very quickly put them in order. Of course, I say that when I'm not trying to talk and do it at the same time. I do that with tarot too. I do all of the numbers, quarts, and majors, and then put them in order that way. Oh, it's snowing for Anna Trish. Yeah, she's up in Canada, even further north. We're supposed to get snow, but we didn't get any more, and it's actually all really warming up, which is a joy right now because it's been so cold. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Only 2 centimeters, but we've had 5, so it's starting to build up then. I saw 10. Oh, that's a 19. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. I used to keep one, and that's one thing that you can do. I used to keep one of my decks that had titles on them. I always kept it in order. It was usually the Under the Roses or something like, I think it's called something like Under the Roses, something about roses. But that's got nice big titles on it. And so I always kept that one in order. So that if I wanted to do it this way, I would always have a deck in order. But because I don't really lay them out this way, I just use my handwritten thing. I don't keep them in order anymore. 29, we're almost there. 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36. Okay. Our country just needs to grind to a halt. Just grinds to a halt when we get heavy snow. Oh no. Yes, Under the Roses. Yeah, that's a good one to use as house cards because you do have such nice, the titles are so nice and clear on it. Okay, let me take my phone off hold, and I'm probably going to have to adjust it so we get more space. Let me move some decks out of the way. I'm gonna spotlight. I think we learned. Poor Jasmine, you look so tired. She's like, I'm just over this day, or just starting this day. Let's see, spotlight video. So I think you should be seeing now the I need a little deck. Where's my little deck? Oh, can we just talk? Somebody sent me this. Look at this little deck. How cute is this? It's called the Mini Lenormand Parchment Deck by Christy Hardway. Look, it's like little squares. I just think it is the cutest little deck. Look at those little birds. That's so cute. It's a little square deck. I think it's so adorable. Little clouds. It's hard to shuffle without making a mess because it's a square. So I just like shush them about on the table. And of course, Lenormand does not use Reversals, is it Alexander Musrick? No, it's Christy Hardway. I'm guessing Etsy. Usually this type of thing is on Etsy, but it's so cute. Okay, where is my little, let me grab, I'll be right back. My baby girl. Let me grab this, and I know this is going to have to come up a little higher. I'm not going to lay out a full, all of these because I can't in the viewfinder get a full size all the way out, but I just wanted to show you real quick. So if you have 2 decks of cards, you're going to take your decks of cards, me waiting for guys. I love my mini deck. Now, one of the things I have to find out though, Jasmine, is to title or not to title. Mine's not title, but I know my deck very, very well. So probably we'll have to enlarge titles on it. Or have both options, because it actually works really quite well once you know the deck without any titles. The number, yes, for sure the numbers, but the titles, I'm like, I don't know. It's kind of cute because they're just so little just to have the painting. But anyways, okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So obviously these are not going to all fit out. But what you want to do is you want to lay your cards out 1 through 9. Make sure you come back over here and start the next row, because that's how the houses are laid out. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you're going to continue to do that and lay all out. If you're doing an 8 by 4, you're going to go 1 through 8. And then of course start over here and go all the way across. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Come back over like a type. Remember the old typewriters? I used to have one. I'm older than most of you, where you grab that thing and pull it all the way across and come back to the beginning, and then lay your cards out. So you would do that for your whole tableau. So I'm just going to kind of straighten this out. So once you would lay all of those cards out, that is just your houses, right? You're not reading that. It's in order. There's nothing to be read there. It's just giving you your houses. Typewriters, I know, I wrote so much on a typewriter. So then you would be doing your shuffle, 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 and then you would lay out your secondary set of cards on top. So now we have coffin in the house of the rider, we have bear in the house of the clover, and so on and so forth. So if you're using 2 decks, that is how you would lay it out to give you the houses. If, however, you're doing a 9 card and you just want to make use of, you would just shuffle, shuffle, shuffle your first deck that's going to be the houses. Generally, it's a deck that has the title on it so that you can, because you're going to be laying a card on top of it and it allows you then to see what the house is. So you shuffle, 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 and then you just lay out a 9 card. These become the houses, which you don't normally have in a 9 card. And then you would use your secondary deck and do the actual shuffling for the reading, lay out. I guess we can always just make a set of black cards with the titles. Yes, you could definitely do that. I've also seen you can get blank playing cards on Amazon and things like that, and then just at the bottom write the title of each of the houses, and then it makes it nice, a clean to set your extra card on. And this also works if you have 2 decks that are larger. So for example, sorry, as I throw things around, you just have to give yourself a little like extra space on the top of it, and you can lay your secondary card down, which I actually almost like better because it's just less chaotic looking, and you can just see that that house card is under there, like that. You can get 100 blank playing cards really cheap on eBay. Yeah, and I know I've seen them, again, I know I've seen them on Amazon, I think, as well, where you can get just a regular deck too, and then just write your titles in, and then it's a nice clean palette to put your secondary thing on. So now I can see, okay, well, I pulled the key, it's in the house of the flowers. That gives me more information. We'll do an actual reading this way so that you can see how it works. But you don't need to have a mini deck to do this. You just need 2 decks of cards in order to do a 9 card with houses. So while we have this out, we're going to look at our other things, but while I have both these right here, let's go ahead and do that. If somebody's got a question, pop that up and we will just do an example of a quick reading using houses in a 9 card. Let me stick these out of the way and we'll use these 2. So yeah, heavy canvas. I'll try to remember. I don't think, let me just peek real quick. Maybe under here. While you think of some questions for me. No, I thought I had, well, here, this is a good example. This is a good example. So this is, a 8x4 plus 4, but what somebody has done here is just taken 2 pieces of fabric and sewed them together, and they used a silver thread or like a gray thread and made and just sewn down to make the houses. And then used fabric paint to write the names of the houses on. And so that makes a really nice, I really like this one. I think this is a nice, simple, clean one that you can fairly easily make. And truthfully, even let's say you don't have a sewing machine, which I don't currently have, you can just get a nice piece of canvas, heavier fabric, and cut it out and fray check the ends of it and do the same thing. You know, get yourself a ruler and fabric paint, and you can do the exact same thing without even having a sewing machine or anything like that. So this is one of my favorites just because it's nice and clean. I actually like there not being any borders. It just keeps it more contained. And then again, you can do a mini version, which would then make it quite small and compact. If you have a mini set of cards, it wouldn't take up that much room to be laying it out. So that is a great example of what I think is a pretty simple way to do a reading cloth. And the one that I have that's in German is similar to this. She used, I think, a burgundy backing and a canvas front. And then she, wrote on them with a fabric marker the titles of it, and it works really beautifully. The other ones that I just grabbed, let's see. I think this is Ciro Marchetti's. So this is Kipper, sorry, but he has ones that are for Lenormand as well. So this one obviously has the images of the actual cards on them, and then has so for the houses. I don't often do grand tableaus and Kipper, so I don't really use this very much, but he has things like this. I know a couple of people use the Gilded Reverie Lenormand, and I know he has cloths or used to, I don't know if he still does, and these are silk backed. I find these actually, they're beautiful, but they are like really slippery because they're silky and they don't lay real smooth. And again, I don't generally use Kipper grand tableaus, so I don't use that very often. And then this is really, and this is a good example. This is like a heavy cloth. This is what Anna Teresa was holding up, but it's the full size, and it just has the 8x4 plus 4. Hers, she said, or somebody's had, maybe hers didn't. Somebody's had one on each side, which is really a great idea, which you could certainly do if you made your own like this, and then just flip it over and have an 8x4 plus 4, or an 8x4 plus 4 on one side and a 9x4 on the other side, and bam, that would be a really great cloth to have. This is the Medea Lenormand, which I really like because it's quite generic in terms of look, even though it's it matches in color for the Medea Lenormand. It's very nice. Like you could use this with any deck. And so then you would just lay it and it has the house underneath it. But for in terms of making your own, this is just a single piece of like canvasy canvasy fabric, and I know there's a name for that. I think it's called serging, maybe. Don't ask me, I'm not a sewer. But she, just ran along it with like a serging or something to be able to keep the edges from fraying. But you can also get, I'm just trying to help people who don't sew, you can also get what's called fray check. I use it for cross stitching all the time, where you can just put a bead of this liquid that you can get in a bottle and you put it along the edge, and it stops things from fraying without ever having to get out your sewing machine or getting a kind of fabric that's not going to fray also. But this is just a single ply of material that you could easily, again, make your own if you wanted to practice with it. I do like, what I like about this layout, it might be overlocked. Yes, yeah, I don't know that, Wendy. I'm sure you're right. I'm so bad with, I've sewn many of things, but it was by just doing and not knowing what any of the proper terms are. I like this because it's nice and clean. And when you have the cards on, all you're seeing is the title. I really like that. So this is my favorite just because it's just simple. But then I also do like this version. Somebody said she didn't have anything up on her shop right now, but I think she just goes on breaks and things come back, but I don't know that for sure. I haven't bought anything in a while. So that's some options for houses. And I think it's fairly easy to make one up for yourself. And then again, if you just have 2 decks of cards, get yourself some blank cards, just put the titles. So there's a lot of options to get a set of houses up without too much money and or skills. Because we all have different, yeah, Colleen says, yeah, if you find out how to do it, pop it up. And I would really think about doing it on both, like one on each side, because I think that's really useful. That way, depending on how you want to do it, and definitely do a mini and a large, because a lot of people like minis now because of space saving for grand tableaus. Okay, something's popping up here. Oh, we're still recording. Okay, we're still recording. Okay, so let's do, I think I did see someone, I think, asked a question. I'm gonna go up to the top. Oh, that's neat. Wendy says her machine embroiders letters. Oh, that would be so neat, because then you could do the lines and then you could actually have it write out the name. That's pretty cool. My son has a part-time job that is working him too many hours, in my opinion, because he's in high school. Yeah. Would it be beneficial to speak to his boss about it, or will it piss my son off? Okay, so here's where, this is exactly what I do when clients ask me questions like this. I'm going to first give you my own personal opinion. It has nothing to do with the cards. Always be very clear. If you're going to give personal opinion, don't try to put it in the cards. Give your personal opinion. My personal opinion is you should probably talk to your son, because he probably will get pissed off. Just in general, I think it's always best to, especially if he's in high school, right? He's got to be learning independence and decision making. I would probably talk to him first. That's my personal opinion. Now we'll see what the cards have to say about it. So if you're a professional, and I do this a lot because I can't help it. I'm a mom, I'm an auntie who gives a lot of advice. And so if somebody asks me something that I'm like, I have my own, I just am very clear to say, all right, before we put the cards down, let me just tell you, this is what I think, but now let's step back and see what the cards say. Okay, let me, there's 3 questions. Yeah, we're going to do a couple, so that's good. I'm glad there's some up there. Okay, so we're going to do this with the 9 card, and we're going to use this deck to first lay out the houses. Do not jump. What time is it? I have my Alexa set to give me an alarm at 2:30 because I have to prep for, I've got to clear out some areas for my landlord's coming. So it will make me jump, but I'm going to pre-warn you so nobody like dumps their glass of pop or something when she yells out loudly. Okay, so we're looking at, in general, is it beneficial to talk to your boss? I think that's kind of a separate question in some way. You know, could you get anywhere with it, with talking to the boss as well, and then whether or not it's going to piss your son off? My thought is probably yes, but every kid's personality is different. Okay, so now I'm just going, again, I don't split with Lenormand. It's just, for me, it's just not something that I do, but you can shuffle, shuffle, shuffle and split if you want to, especially with the 9 card, but I don't. So we're going to, this is just the houses here. I'm gonna kind of pull them apart. Okay, so that's setting our houses into place. Now we're going to do, and I'm going to go for the anchor. So because my significator card for work, well, let's think about this for a minute, right? He's going to talk to his boss. So there's 2 options you could go here for a significator. You could go to, some people use the bear card for bosses or supervisors, mentors at work, that kind of thing. But this is a general question regarding work. So even though the anchor card is work versus a boss, as long as you're clear about what it is that you're going to do, I would still do work, because the anchor card for me is sort of generic in that it's work. And so I would like to leave everything else. Because think about it, let's say the bear card showed up in the reading in the future, that would tell me that your son needs to tap into his own inner strengths and kind of learn to work out his own problems and that kind of thing. So I would want that bear to have an opportunity to show up. So I would back into the generic significator of the anchor, and is how I would approach it. So we're looking for the work card, which for me is the anchor, surrounding talking to the boss with your son's work situation. Now, here you have a chance to either just lay out, if that's how you do it. I don't lay out like that, right? I'm going to turn things over and I'm going to find the anchor card. Proximity, proximity, proximity. And I probably passed it, but. Oh, now here. So this is a good example, because this is one of the reasons that laying out houses is kind of cool for a 9 card if you do it the way that I do it. So here's the anchor, 1, 2, 3, 4 after, and then you would take 4 before, but there's only 1 because we're kind of towards the beginning. So I still lay things out. Here's the anchor, which I should, pay attention. There we go. There's the anchor, and now I'm going 1. And you can do this either way. I don't know if I talked about this last time when you do this. You can either go 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Or you can go 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't really matter in the end. Generally doing something again consistently is helpful, but it doesn't really matter as long as you just kind of pick how you're going to go. And then we only have the 1 that was in front of it. So we don't have 3 cards above the situation to look at, nor do we have the corner card, except for, because we're doing houses, and I'll do another one of these doing it straight up. Because we have the houses, we do get already a little bit of an overall feeling, because whatever was in there was going to be in the house of the whip, which is about repetitive things. So Cassandra, for me, this would say you might have past patterns of, that's why I hate doing readings sometimes like this, because sometimes little things come up, but you might have patterns of going and doing things for your son that maybe he should be approaching himself. And so that would be something that I would think about with the birch rod being there, that overall, maybe discussing with him how he could address this might be better than to be fall into patterns of action there. that's the one thing that comes up here by looking. So one of the benefits of the houses, I'm trying to keep it on the houses here. One of the benefits of the houses is that when we do it this way and we don't have we don't have a focused in theme here, we still have a little bit of information that we can go to because we've laid the houses down. But let's first work with the cards that we have. So here we have the anchor. Now this is interesting because we have the sun in the house of the flowers directly in front of it. That's some pretty positive energy there. So already we're seeing the fact that, okay, this could actually lead to some things changing in terms of being able to have less hours and less stress on him. But the other future card is the letter in the house of the coffin. This would worry me as a reader, because sometimes the letter card can speak to contracts, like job contracts and things like that. And so having it in the house of the coffin, you could literally say things are going to get better because he's no longer going to be working so many hours, if that makes sense. You know, in terms of a reading, you could say, well, he's going to have more time to focus on school, but that's because he's not going to have the job that's giving him the hours. So that gets to be a little bit dicey, right? In terms of what does that really mean in terms of a future card, in terms of future, whether or not you should go forward and do that. So we're going to keep going, but right in the moment as a reader, I'm like, because I know how Lenormand is. Lenormand can say the truth, but you have to think a little deeper. The truth is that addressing this situation is going to bring the sun out and good luck and good things coming, right? But that doesn't mean he's keeping the job. It just means that it might be a better situation overall because he's got more time to focus on his schooling. So you have to be careful that just because you see the sun doesn't mean, okay, yeah, great, I'm going to go ahead, forward with this because there's the sun. Well, but look what's also there in terms of I know the sun's actually making it hard to see, but in terms of the letter being in the house of the coffin, that means just kind of stop and say, okay, Lenormand, I know your trickery ways. What's going on here? Well, yeah, this could actually be better, but there is a potential that it could cause problems in terms of keeping the job, or could he knock him down maybe a lot of hours, which would be good in terms of his schooling, in terms of that kind of thing, but in terms of his paycheck and things like that, it might not be the best solution depending on how much money he needs to bring in, right? So you got to watch Lenormand's trickery ways. We do see in the past that balance is in the house of the clouds. So you can certainly see what Cassandra is saying here about that he might be working too many hours. Things are out of balance and out of whack here. And we can even see his journey forward is complicated with the snake, and it's in the house of the mice. So his ability to move towards transformation and move towards kind of getting in the direction he needs to go is being eaten away. So I would say, yeah, Cassandra has a right to be concerned about the situation because it might be impeding his schooling and this kinds of things, the activities that he needs to do as a high schooler. There's some balance that does need to be restored. I'm gonna have to go close my curtain because we cannot see this at all. I'm gonna finish this and then I'll go close that. Beneath here, we again have that mice going on. We do have the cross in the house of the decision. So this is definitely a weighty decision in terms of, should you be speaking to your son before you do so and having that conversation with him first? Is this, because he might have a better, let's be honest, he might have a better view than you about how his boss is going to react to this, right? He works for the person. And so having that conversation with him may lead to him saying, you know what, I know my boss, somebody else tried to do that and ended up with 3 hours a week, or, you know what I'm saying? He could actually have some input into how this might actually go down with the boss. So that can mean a couple different things. It certainly says, think about this a step here before you do it, whether or not it's talking to him, or be aware that there could be consequences, and how is that going to go off if all of a sudden your son has 3 hours a week instead of whatever he has. So And then we talked about the future there. So you can see how, hopefully you can see how having the houses here, it gives you that nuance to the card. So for example, in this one, we have the cross. Well, okay, that's weight and difficulty and things, but what is it directly relating to? Is it directly to weight on, you know, how things are going right now? Is this weight of how things are gonna be? Well, it's in the house of the road, at the crossroads. This is where we've got to make a decision. So now we know that the weight is directly related to the decision that needs to be made about whether or not to talk to the boss or not. So it gives us that extra layer of being able to read the card focused in on what its situation is going to be. And same thing with this. Think about whether this letter was right here by itself, which is just talking about job, could be in terms of a job. I do always look at contracts with letter, but it could also just be solid communication and things of that nature. But that looks very different than that letter in the house of the coffin. So that's a very different reading than the letter by itself. Same thing, now not so much with the sun because you got the sun and the flowers, but it certainly puts an even stronger connotation to the sun there. So it does allow you, one thing that's interesting is that in a small reading, we have the anchor showing up in the house of the lily, which means balance needs to be in you know, key here. And then we also have the lily showing up behind it in the house of the clouds. So we can see that that idea of having balance and harmony in his schedule is important. And she's again, you can kind of confirm to Cassandra that she's right to stop and think about this as having an impact, because it probably is having an impact on his, you know, schooling or whatever other ways that his time, the time that he has. So there's that. Hopefully that helps a little bit, Miss Cassandra. Let me just quickly, I don't. Anna Teresa asked, do I do this often with clients? I don't. I will say that I do far more grand tableaus than I do 9 cards in general anyways, but when I do a 9 card, I do a straight 9 card. Again, I feel like for me, it's one of those kind of quicker readings, and I feel like I get a lot out of it without that extra level of doing that. So I don't, for myself, ever do what I just did there, but I can see the benefits of it. It's just that in my opinion, a 9 card is a quick answer thing. You know, if I want to really start digging in, I'm going to be doing a grand tableau where the houses are built in anyway. So I would probably be more of a proponent of, if you want houses with a 9 card, just lay a grand tableau out and just look to the 9 card. Again, like we talked about last week, it doesn't take that much longer to lay the, you know, especially if you have a house thing, plop all your cards down and just go to your 9 card and you've got the houses built in their proper positions. So I would probably be a bigger proponent of that than this. But there are people who are never going to do a grand tableau or just don't like doing grand tableaus, don't have the space to do that. So I think it is, it's a good thing to be able to show for people to be able to use. But if you like houses with your 9 card, my opinion is lay out a grand tableau, just go to the 9 card, don't look at anything else in the grand tableau. It's got the houses there, do your 9 card reading and bam, you're done. That's my personal opinion. But let's do one more real quick with, well, let's do that real quick because that would, I think, would be more helpful. So let's see what the next question was. Going back. Christy, I keep debating whether I should get back into feng shui, house healing, house healing, space clearing work. Not sure if it's just an extra distraction or if it's a good idea. Okay, so I would again be looking at 2 things here. Either the work card, because that is just general work, or the moon card, which is sort of our side businessy thing. Because Christy hasn't asked me a question regarding work and this, and we're just looking at one thing, I'm still going to stay to the work card, because again, I would like the moon to be able to show up as something that's rising and going up if it needs to. So for this particular question, I will still use the anchor card, but if she had asked a question that had two parts, where there was two, a job that she's currently doing and she wants to add this in, then I would have the anchor card and the moon card. But in this case, I'm just looking, and what I'm going to do is just a 9-card reading with the houses, but I'm going to lay out a grand tableau. But we're not doing any of the other things. All we're doing is going straight into the 9 card. Okay, so then I'm just going to start laying them down. And the first one, I'm laying them down, upside down, because that's the good. Wait. There we go. There we go. I just kind of lay the first one down fairly messy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I don't know why I have them like that, but we're going to continue because I pulled off the top. Okay. Get that sort of straight, and then you can kind of whip through the rest of it faster. No, not for this one. I'm just going to do 9 by 4 because we're not doing the whole grand tableau. Okay, so we're just going to whip through these. I feel like if you timed yourself, especially if you weren't like trying to stay under camera and that kind of stuff, it just, in my opinion, once you get comfortable at it, it just doesn't really take that long to lay down a grand tableau, so I don't feel like you're putting a ton of extra time in to lay a grand tableau versus a 9 card. Now again, we're not doing a grand tableau here. We're just, I've got another one upside down. There we go. So we're going to go look to the anchor and just do a 9 card, right? We've got a bunch of them upside down. We're just rolling with it. There's no reversals in Lenormand. People, I get that message a lot. Do you do somebody said no. If somebody tells you to do reversals in Lenormand, they're just doing their own thing. That is not traditionally there. So we have our anchor up here. So we only have, in a 9 card, we only have these cards right here, right? Because we're just doing a 9 card. Now remember, one of the benefits of doing a 9 card this way is that even though you can say, oh shoot, I only have these, I could actually do some more things because I've got everything laid out to be able to do a 9 card. For example, right away, because I already have the grand tableau laid out, I have these first 3 important cards there, and it ends with the stars card. So for Christy's question, as a reading for her, I would say actually take a step back and make sure you're scoping everything out and getting good perspective, but it's actually leading to this being the direction you should be going in with the stars being there. So right away, because I've done this instead of a 9 card, I've already got a bit of a message that says yes to me, that this is a good idea for her to do. We also have okay, let me pull this out. So here's my chart. I don't have things laid out. Here's my chart that I always have right at my reading table. Of course, these I actually know, but sometimes you're stuck in some weird place and you're like, oh shoot, I don't remember what that is. Just keep this next to you. But here's it laid out. So I can just really quickly see, okay, well, the anchor is in the house of the rider. right? So right away we've got good message, good news. It's in the house of good news, right? So that gives me some nuance to what's going on there. We have a little bit of luck and happiness coming from getting that perspective with the Clover card. We also have the rider. The anchor's in the house of the rider, and the rider has shown up in the reading itself. Now, this is interesting because there is a little bit of a news about not falling into past patterns of behavior because it's in the house of the whip. So you've said if you should get back into, which tells me that you were in it before because of the way your wording was. So being careful if you do this again to whatever was maybe causing problems in the past with it, maybe it got overwhelming, you got too much work or whatever that it took away from what you were trying to do. Think about ways in which when you were doing it before, it didn't work quite so smoothly, and be aware of that so that when you go into it again, if you do go into it again, you don't make those same mistakes or fall into those same patterns. So that gives us that extra nuance there. We do have the journey card here in the house of the scythe. Now this is interesting because we already know she stopped doing this in the past, right? She's saying she's getting back to it. So the scythe card is about harvesting. There's something that she can harvest from the journey that she had in the past. So these two cards for me, even though they're not in the past position, because of the rider being in the house of the whip, and because I know from her question that she has done this already in the past, what comes out to me as a reader as a message for her is just be careful. Think about what you can learn from when you had done it in the past, both the things that worked and the things that didn't work so well for you, so that you can apply those as you move forward. But as a reader, so if I was just doing this cold reading for her, I would say because of this, I would say, yes, this is the direction you need to go in, but you need to be doing it in a way that is mindful and that keeps the whole perspective of what you're trying to accomplish in whatever your whole work life looks like, making sure that you've taken a good look of how to work this in such a way that is helpful and it doesn't repeat past mistakes, and that some way you're harvesting from the path that you've been on leading up to this point. So that's how I would answer that for Colleen. And having those extra houses in place certainly helps to get out a really small amount of cards, right? Because I'm using the star card, let's be honest, but that's still only 5 cards, but it allows me to give a pretty definitive what I see in the cards, because I actually have another layer there of the cards, the houses there. And I don't think that takes too much longer than just laying out a 9 card. So that's an example of using your houses in a 9 card by just simply laying out a 9 card. Don't look at any, and we're not looking at any of this. We're just going to the significator and doing a 9 card. But we now have the houses in play so that we can be more definitive about our answers. Okay, so that's that. So now let me go here. Okay, we talked about, okay. So Jasmine says, is it a good idea to look for another job? Okay, so I'm gonna pick, we're not gonna worry about the flips because we just know they are not flips. So now I'm gonna use this. I am not gonna do a full grand tableau. I mean, I'm gonna peek at things quickly, but I just wanna use this to show the things that we've talked about today in terms of knighting, chaining, mirroring by looking at the corners because that's all I do with mirroring, just to put a few of these things into place. Colleen says no past. I'm not sure what that means. Oh, that there wasn't any past showing up. I didn't have it scrolled down there. Yeah, but it's interesting that the cards that were there were actually pointing to the past as well, which I always find that interesting, because that really shows how the past is actually quite influential to the future of what's going on right now, even though the past cards didn't show up. Okay, so we're looking at Miss Jasmine and whether or not how things are looking for her, looking for another job due to some issues surrounding her boss. So because she's kind of laid a couple of details out, we're going to look to the anchor card, but in this case, I probably will also look to the bear card for us. Now you can do this in two ways. Because Jasmine is here, we could actually say, okay, Jasmine, is your boss a man or a woman? And we could then actually look to that specific significator. Or you could just simply say, Jasmine is a woman, so I'm just going to use the other significator. That is a lazy man. That's my preference, only because the significator cards are made just to be significator cards. The bear card is meant to be other things. So again, I always try to think about how can I pull back the significator card in a way that leaves other cards to do their own function. So I would probably have approached this as, okay, Jasmine, you're a woman, so whether your boss is a male or female, if I didn't know, if she wasn't right there where I could talk to her, I would say the male card is just going to stand in for your boss so I can take a peek around there. You can then also, again, traditionally, you could go to the bear card. Although I see very often the bear card is often used as a female boss or mentor of that kind of thing, but people do use it either way as a boss. But in this instance, because we have Jasmine here, I'm going to be looking at the male card. So we're going to look at the work card because that's going to give us an idea of how things are looking for leaving. And then we're going to be just taking a peek around him just because he sounds like he's causing problems. So she brought up that extra information there of making threats, or in some way, he's being a problem in the work environment itself. Okay, so now in this case, you would do your whole, we're doing an actual grand tableau. Now, this is important. The fact that, so right away, and this is one of the things somebody asked about, do things supersede the step before? And the answer is no. So the very first important thing of a grand tableau is looking at the first three cards. Trust that transitions moving to a better place in the work environment. So right away, I would say to Jasmine, you should seriously consider moving your jobs, because it looks like the movement away. So a stork card is about, you're here, it's about literally moving space into a better environment. Wherever you're transitioning, it's a better environment. Now, this is not saying just moving anywhere, right? It's very specific. You want to make sure that you're obviously moving into a better situation than where you're at now, which means not just jumping ship immediately, but making steps to be able to make sure that you're moving into something that's better than what you have. But right away, in terms of a yes and no question, the fact that the anchor card has shown up in the first three cards is significant to me. The fact that the stork, which is very clearly a movement card in Lenormand, has shown up, and that a positive card of the dog card of trust and loyalty, trusting in moving to a better place, that this would be a better thing for you, I would say yes. So if I was forced to give a yes and no, now anything else that I see is not going to change what I feel about this. It may give us layers and nuances that, because think about it, it could be very clearly the best thing for Jasmine to do to move her job into another place. But life is not black and white. Nobody's life that you're reading for is black and white. So you may start to pull up things that say, okay, it probably is better to leave, but let's say your finances are going to take a hit. So now Jasmine has to say, well, okay, best case scenario, I should leave, but right now I can't afford to take a financial hit. So I may have to make decisions that are, I might have to stay a little bit longer until I can get my finances in order. That doesn't mean that this is wrong. It means it's giving her more information so that she can make a decision in a world that is not black and white. So hopefully that is an example of how further information isn't going to change that, but it's going to give Jasmine more information to work on. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Oh, okay, I'm going to do this now because I promised to do one. So let's do an 8. 2, 3. So we can see right away as we're laying down, here's the boss that we talked about. Now I've got to go close the curtain. And in the upper left is the cloud. So he's definitely an issue in the situation for her. We can even see the cross card behind him. So I'm guessing he's not a brand new. I think probably as long as he's been his boss, he might have been a problem for her. Or at least this isn't just started up today. It's been an ongoing issue. And the stork and the dog were on top of the significant. Interesting. True. What's interesting is that here, right in front of him is her needing to be smart about making a solid decision because that's what's going to make things rise. Again, off of that, I would say probably, again, highlights the yes for me. Because making this decision about whether to leave or not, and leave this guy in particular, is going to affect her sense of security. So now we have that, and then we've got the extra, I don't know if you guys can see these. Yes, you can. Extra 4. This is interesting too when we look at the essence cards here. We have gaining some perspective, but we have good things, big things coming, and even this idea of a job contract out of a painful ending. So we already, again, for me, because we start here, we're layering our information. Already I have the message that moving is probably for her best. Now I'm seeing that she has an opportunity potentially for actually getting a better job contract, even though it's going to be difficult for her to leave. So building from first these 3 and now this, I would still be pretty solidly with this is a good idea. The tower always says step back though and see the big picture. You know, I'm a big proponent. And again, this is where you would say, okay, personal opinion here, not looking at the cards. You know, you never leave a job until you have a job lined up. Like this is not a time to act rashly and just say, because sometimes that is the case. Sometimes it is a bad working environment. You just need to leave, even if it's going to hit you financially. Whereas this one, when the tower shows up, it's like, okay, yep, it's looking like that's probably a good idea to start thinking about, but make sure you take the time to step back, get above the situation, and get a really good layout and plan for yourself as you do move forward. But so far, looking at those 2 things, you know, I'm still hanging in the same thing, that best case scenario for her is not necessarily working with this particular person. Now, whether or not she could stay within her same job and move in a different way where she's not underneath him, that would be something that she might be able to explore as well. Okay, so just trying to do this quickly so we can get to the chaining and things. So we looked at, I've skipped ahead because they're sticking right here, and I looked at the essence. We can look at our corner cards, trusting that the overall path for her, because where things are being eaten away, like she's, you know, this is a problem for her. And so when the trust is connected with her journey, see, I told you it make me jump. Alexis, stop. So this tells me she needs to trust in the bigger journey of things, right, of where this thing is taking her, because right now she's connected directly with the mice. Alexa, stop. Sorry, she's not always cooperative. So with her being connected to the mice, this is definitely a problem, and it's probably just a constant little things that this person does, just chewing away at her, like it's eating away at her directly, and so that's a problem. That's certainly something to pay attention to. The tower card is always a card for my company. Gotcha. So it just means more broad travel. Yeah, if that's something to think about then, especially with that being the we need to we'll look at that more in terms of the house, because that's interesting that that's in this one, that's in the house of the key. So if the job, if that reflects your company and it's in the house of the key, which is success, then you might want to think about ways in which you could work within the same company, but not be directly related to that person. Stars as a journey. Sorry, I sometimes condense the words. Yeah. So the ship is a journey card in terms of taking a journey, like going to Canada or something like that. The stars are your overall journey, like your overall path in life, sort of your idea of your destiny. Again, I don't believe in a fixed future, but I do believe that we have overall paths that we're on, and the stars card sort of reflects that larger journey. In the case of a job question, it's that overall trajectory of her career or trajectory of her job. So that's how I differentiate. That's actual travel versus our life travel, and which needs that hand motion to really be, because we're all very demonstrative with our hands. Okay, so we look to the corners there and kind of get a quick idea about where things are going. We look to the anchor card. Now, in this case, we can look at the anchor. Now we're going to look to the houses, right? So you pull out your handy dandy thing, or you've got it on a spread, and we can see that the job is in the house of the ship. Jasmine has already said us that she has an opportunity to change, but it would include travel. The ship is actual travel, journeying abroad, as she's saying. So because we know that, this is another indication for Jasmine that there is there may be an opportunity for her to take within her company that was going to include that traveling. Maybe that's the road if it's going to get her away from what seems, because so far, given what Jasmine said and given what we've seen, the problem may not be with her company. The problem may be directly with this person. And so if she's able to stay in the company, not lose, money or these kinds of things to be able to happen, but be able to get away from the person, that might be an option for her to be able to do that. But let's keep going here. So I'm going to do a quick little chain here, okay? So here we have the anchor. The anchor is in the house of the ship. So now I'm going to look to the ship card, and again, taking out your handy dandy thing, we can see the ship is in the house of the birds. So this would indicate to me that while travel is great, Jasmine may be a little bit anxious, or it might not be exactly, she might be worried about having to maybe travel more often or be abroad more often. There may be something about that could be causing some angst or anxiety about that. So we're going to keep following this. So this is in the house of the birds. So, okay, let's go to the birds here. And so here we can see the house, the birds are in the house of the man. Now, this is important, right? Because now we have a chain that has linked us from the work card to the man card, which we've already identified before we started as being the problem, right? This is the boss that's causing problems. So you can read this a couple different ways. You can read this as, with the anchor being in the house of the ship, that she probably needs to take this, get out, if at least for right now, if it gets her away from this particular person, because the direct connection between the man and the anchor is through the birds, which is the anxiety that this man is obviously causing for her. So we've got this link going on here. I could read this two ways. What I just said, that the fact is she probably, if she doesn't want to move jobs right away, moving at least jobs within her company would be smart. Take the job that's going to take her away from the guy that's causing anxiety. But the other way, that, because I know Jasmine and she likes to just get information, and she'll take it and run with it. The other thing that I would say to Jasmine is, be careful that there isn't some way in which this guy, the boss, might be going to cause her problems in trying to shift. Like if she decides she wants to move positions so that she can and take this will cause her to travel more, is he going to be an impediment to you doing that? Like, is he going to stir up trouble for you doing that? And just keep that in the back of her head so that she can make sure that he's not going to trip that up in some way. But as a reader, I feel more along the lines that this is indicating stay in the company, try to shift this over to one which you might be moving more, because clearly the problem seems to be him and not the company. So that's the two ways. And I think it's important, again, we don't treat ourselves or our people we're reading for as if they're children. They're grown adults. They know more about the situation than you do. So give them the information. It's not confusing for me to say to Jasmine, this is one way you could look at it. The other way you could look at it is there's a potential he could kind of cause some issues here. So be aware of that as you're making your decisions. Jasmine's a grown adult. She can now take that information. It connects in her head. Oh yeah, I think that's already been a problem, but now she's aware of it and she's paying attention. So one of the biggest things I think is that if we treat ourselves and our clients as people who are capable of taking information, you don't have to have the one perfect answer. If you're seeing two things, lay it out on the table and then you keep moving. So just say what you see, and it's up to them to take the information and do with it what they will. It's not my job to make Jasmine's decision. My job is to give her whatever I see so that she can make the decision that she makes. And I think that that's, anyways, I'm running off on a rabbit trail, but okay. So that's an example of a chain that has connected two things in the same reading that we're looking at. And so that's important to pay attention to. And that's the kind you really like to see, because it's like, okay, bam, we've got that direct connection. But even if it hadn't, you can still chain. So let's take a different chain. That was the work chain. Let's look at Jasmine herself over here. She's in the house of the coffin. Now, because of what the question was about whether or not she needs to get out of this situation with this guy, that to me is a very clear, of course, we already got a clear answer, yes, here for me. This solidifies that we're staying where she's at exactly in this position is probably not a good idea for her, because she's in the house of the coffin, she's connected to the mice. This whole situation is not doing well for her. She's not something that she wants to stay in. But let's follow it. So then we find the coffin. Again, take your chart. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Here we have the coffin in the house of the lily. So if she puts an end to this situation that she's in, that's bringing her into balance. That's bringing things back into balance, back into harmony. This is obviously upsetting her sense of balance. Harmony, she said she likes her job, she likes her company. So this guy is really disrupting that in a way that's, not great. We can continue and go to the lilies. So again, kind of follow. I always just find a marker point, like that this is down here, and then you can just zip up, right? So we know the anchor, and where we're trying to go to. We're trying to go to the lilies. So we know we're here, and you just go up 2, and we can see the mountains. So there is an obstacle to her balance and her sense of harmony, which we already know, right? Sometimes you're going to follow these trails and they're going to confirm what you already know. That's not a failure of the trail. It's another piece of the puzzle that confirms that there's definitely a bad cycle here that I would say probably isn't going to improve just by sitting around and doing nothing, right? And again, I can be a little looser with Jasmine because she's done a lot of readings about her work, and she's a pretty solid reader. So I'm just giving her what I'm seeing. Now, if I'm doing a reading for somebody that I don't know at all, that I don't know for sure if they are going to use their own common sense, then I'm always very careful to word things that I never take away the whole point is that the client has to make their own choices and decisions. And it's so easy for people, again, if you're reading for yourself, it doesn't matter, but we do have a lot of readers in the group. And it's so important that you don't take away their ability to make choices, but give them information. So it's the same thing with health readings. If I'm reading for my, daughter, I can hound her to go to the doctor and do a health reading. If I'm doing it for somebody I don't know if they're going to go do it, I'm not going to give them that. I'm not going to do that. So the same thing with Jasmine. Like, I could be a little more blunt with Jasmine about this because I know she's perfectly capable of making her own decisions. But otherwise I wouldn't be more like, okay, yeah, this really looks like you get yourself out of this situation. It would be more, here's the facts. What are you going to do with those? So that's another way that you can chain. Do I chain every card in a reading? No, you'd be here forever if you chained all of them. Look to the major significator card and see where that goes, which we saw that led to him. For this, I wanted to chain over how is this impacting her, chain her. So just important areas that you want to chain. Now, I want to quickly be able to show you, it gets really confusing. Two things about chaining. If you chain too much, it's so much information, like it just starts to get a blob of stuff for you to weed through. So just use things sparingly. If you get too far away, it also gets really, if you start chaining something and you're like chaining and chaining and chaining and chaining, and it's not connecting to anything, it's not valuable. Again, I generally only chain about three steps. Sometimes the fourth, if I peek ahead and I see that, okay, that's ending at something or it's giving me something actionable. But I don't think I ever go beyond four steps away from the chain, because the farther away you are, it just starts to break down and you just got this, it just muddles things. It's not, use all of these extra things sparingly to give you extra information when it makes sense to do so. But I want to give an example of chaining, or I'm sorry, of knighting. So let's take a look at the anchor, because the main question is the anchor. I can't knight up because there's no cards. I can't knight to, again, in my parameters, I don't knight when I can only, so let's just breathe, Kelly. Breathe. I love Lenormand. I get so excited. Okay. So let's talk again about knighting. Knighting moves like a chess piece. So here's the card. Is if your finger is a game piece. We're going to move it like a knight. 1, 2, and a knight can either go left or right. If you don't play chess, I always stop to think some of you may not know what a knight does. So 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3. But if I can't form 2 cards to a knighting, I don't knight that way. Lenormand, very rarely you do read a single card, so I like to get a pair. It's just, again, a way to narrow it down to when it's important. So for me, if there's not 2 cards that makes the knighting, I don't do it. So I know I'm not going to knight forward, and I know I'm not going to knight back because it's up at the top. But I can knight underneath things, underneath the anchor card. So 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3 makes these 2 cards a knight for underneath the work situation. She definitely needs to go out to make use of her contacts, right? So especially in terms of a job, the garden card is about networking. It's about all of those people that we're connected with and that we know and that we have our network of connections within the job environment. And so her needing to spread out of this, here's one little network that we know is a problem. She needs to be networking out further. And somebody else in the company may be able to help her again if she wants to maybe move positions, but she needs to do so in a way that's going to allow her to reignite her passion. I'm guessing, given what we've seen with him and what she said, she's probably not feeling overly passionate about her job environment right now. And so being able to connect outward to try to connect with somebody else, either within the job or in an entirely different job, to find a different job. She wants to use her current contacts to be able to do that. So she may have somebody within the job that she can trust and that she can reach out to say, look, I've got to shift things a little bit. How can you help me get back to a position in which I'm loving my job again? Because of the heart here. Now, what's interesting, again, this is not really part of knighting. This is my own personal thing. I do like to peek at the card between the two, because what's between her networking out and getting her passion is the book card. So there's either information she might be able to gain from who she's networking out to, or it can indicate training, that whatever she may be able to shift, or let's say if she was a move job entirely, she may have to do some training to really get to what she wants to do passionately. But it can also just be information. It can be secrets. Remember, the book card can be about secrets. So there may be, how we already saw the chain where he could actually cause problems for her in terms of perhaps shifting to this other job that would do traveling more. This could involve that there could be information she might learn from other people that she trusts, contacts that she has within the job that are going to reveal some of that. But the goal here is for her to get back to where she is, being able to feel passionate about the job that she's in again. But because this is knighting underneath the surface of things, I personally would pay attention to that book card there. And because of the way that we chained with him, there can be ways that he might be undermining her that she needs to be aware of. Sorry, I'm really rolling off, and I do have to go soon because my boss or my landlords are going to show up. But I think we've gotten enough here for at least Jasmine to be able to get some degree of information. I hope this has shown, though, that we're building a puzzle, we're building a story, and because we uncover something else down at the bottom, don't go back and change what you've already said. Let that be added information for you that isn't going to trip up what you've already said. You've built a story. If something comes up, let's just say, for the sake of this showed, probably she needs to shift something up. There's a change into a better place that she needs to go in. But let's just say that we went to the next step of looking at the job itself, because that would have been my next step, right? So I would have done all the corners, and then I would have come back to the job itself, because this is a question directly about the job. So this actually, we have it right here, sorry. So the next step would have been going to her card, because we do the corners, or we do the first three, we do the corners, we do the essence card, and I just threw that on the floor, and then we go to her card to look, and she's in the house of the coffin. Technically, that's a negative card. That doesn't mean all of a sudden that it turns from, yeah, you probably should leave, to no, the coffin is negative. It means no. It means that she needs to put an end to, because we already know she probably needs to move to a better position. A stork card is always moving to something better. So the coffin card doesn't all of a sudden change a yes into a no. How do we read this in context of what we've already seen? We've already seen that it's probably better for her to move to a better position. So now we read her in the house of the coffin. Yeah, you need to put an end to this situation, because it's causing you problems, right? And she also needs to be really smart, la la la. So remember that as we're building information, the next information is not going to trip up everything you've just said. It's going to add layers and nuances, and you're always reading it in context to what you've already established in the reading, if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. So I know this particular class is probably a little confusing, but remember what I said at the beginning. You don't do all this at once, right? You don't do this every time you do a grand tableau. You don't knight and chain and mirror and do all of, and you don't chain all of the different cards. To start with, if you're brand new to Lenormand, again, stay with the grand tableau the way we talked about last week. Go back to week 4 and stay there for a while. Now this week, because you're in a class where you're learning, take a little bit of a chance to throw down, nothing serious, just throw, you don't even have to, I think you should have a question, but say just do a general reading for yourself and just play around with chaining, just so you can see how it works. Play around with knighting so you can see how it works. But in terms of your own readings, you don't need to do all this right now. Get comfortable with just reading the steps that we already have shown in a grand tableau. Get comfortable there first. And then if you play around and you're like, oh, I really like this chaining thing, like this is kind of cool, then just add that into your reading. You don't have to add them all into your reading. And then also remember, these are individual tools. So jot down somewhere, okay, chaining is giving you connections. Knighting is giving you a step further information, either future, past, below, or above. I said some things earlier, you may have to rewind it, but that you take the extra information and my phone's doing, no, it's ringing, it's okay, we'll switch back. just pull out the information that's going to help you in the circumstances. Don't pull out every tool in your toolbox. That's, I think, my point that I'm trying to rambly make. Because next week, we're going to also add in some other things, like how do you do timing? Like if you want to get timing, in my opinion on timing, hit and miss. You can get a general idea where things are going. I think it was Caitlin Matthews who said you can usually be right about 25% of the time in terms of trying to say, okay, on January 5th, 1965, that's the wrong way. We're going to travel in the past. 2025, you're going to meet the man of your dreams, right? To get something very specific in any form of divination is about impossible. But there are things set into individual cards in Lenormand that speak to timing. There is also a great way, and the only thing I really do with timing is there is a spread where you cast a tableau. I believe Caitlin Matthews talks about it in her book. And there's one other source that I had read it, because I knew I had read it before I read Caitlin Matthews, that you can lay a tableau out, look for where your significator card and where it is at, the house it is in, can give you some idea, some information about timing when you're really trying to nail down timing. So we're going to talk about timing. I can't remember all the other things, but kind of some miscellaneous things, just to kind of wrap up, and then do some more of these, just throwing some, I don't think we may have a very brief in terms of looking at slide presentation, but I try to use the last class as really getting a lot of grand tableaus on the table, so that I personally feel that seeing, readings in action is one of the best ways to coalesce all the stuff that we're talking about, versus just blah, 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 me talking at you continually. So, like I just did today. If you, again, this week, if you want to do a grand tableau and send it to me, please go ahead and do so. Again, I'm not going to go through read the entire grand tableau, but I will kind of look at what you've done, give you a little bit of input on what I've seen in your thing. And so make sure you do that if you want to get that feedback back there. And if you have any questions, this is really a great time this week to think about what areas really are tripping you up maybe in reading Lenormand. What are some specific questions? What is, let's say, a combination of cards that showed up in response to a question that you just don't get that. So just take the time this week to think of, like, if there are any questions that you really want to nail, so that we can walk through those next week, and at least try to address the things that are really might be tripping you up. I'm trying to think. I think that's everything. So I'm going to go real quick, clean up before my landlord's, well, I've cleaned up, but he wants me to pull some things against the wall and stuff. So I'm going to run off. But as always, it was fun. And I'm kind of sad that next week is the last week, but we're going to be leaving. Yes, there is chat today. I've told them I'll be teaching till 3, and then I have to start again at 4. So there will be chat at 4. But we will be keeping the mobilized group up even after class is over. So we have that anyways. And we will be scheduling a live thing to try to play the game, just to give it a go. So, all right, I'm going to get going, and I will see you guys all. I know people have asked for advanced classes. I need to really think about that this year. Last year's goal was just to get through a full cycle of my classes. My issue with advanced classes is, I don't really have an issue with them. I feel like for me, an advanced class is more doing. Like, most of the tools of what you can use in Lenormand are, we've lined out. I mean, there's always more to add, but the key tools are already, this is how you do them, that they're there. So for me, trying to figure out what an advanced class looks like in terms of a class is a lot of application, right? It's about doing. It's about actual walking, like, students through doing them over and over again and things of that. So that's kind of the question there. Can I ask a question regarding your upcoming tarot class? Can I sponsor someone to take your class? Oh, yeah, of course. Yes, you can certainly pay for somebody else's class. Obviously, making sure they know, so they don't do the same thing, or let me know who that is so that I make sure that they don't, they want to do it, pay separately. But yes, you can. In fact, thank you, because I do have to put that up for registration today. Tarot. I think that's in a month. I try to give a month registration. So, okay. There we go. I'm going to stop talking for a minute. Does it matter what cards you have for the tarot class, Chris? No, as long as you have a deck of cards. My recommendation for the tarot class is a copy of the Rider-Waite-Smith, a pip deck. When I teach tarot, it is through both, having pips cards up and the Rider-Waite-Smith cards up. And of course, having a deck that you absolutely, it's your deck, one that you love. That's my recommendation, is 3 decks of cards, but you only need 1 deck. Is it a beginner class? It's similar to this. I guess I don't consider them to be complete beginners, because I have people that take the class that read both Lenormand, all the things that I teach. People take them either way, but you don't have to know anything about, say, Lenormand to start this. You don't have to know anything about tarot to do this. But we will walk through all of the cards and then how to read. If somebody is an extremely comfortable, competent tarot reader, will they enjoy taking the class? I do have people that are quite comfortable in tarot reading, and they do take, or Lenormand or whatever, and they still get something out of somebody else's perspective, but it's probably that sort of advanced or beginner, refresher. You just want to solidify some things. So that goes for all of my classes. You don't have to have any experience to take them, but they can be good even if you're already reading them. But they wouldn't be considered advanced for sure. So I don't know if that helped whatsoever. If you have any other questions about that, please just email me. I'm happy to answer, or try to give you an idea of what's covered, and maybe that will help you be able to make that decision. So, okay, I gotta go. Goodbye. I can see her barking, which means there's probably a landlord in the building, because she's like